Do all the panelists know how many witnesses we have?
Yeah, the number is 532.
Hello, the time is now 5:32 on February 26, 2020, and this public meeting of the State Board of Education will come to order. The roll call will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Hayworth, please call the roll.
Dr. Gasoi. Dr. Gasoi. Mr. Jacobson. Present. President Wattenberg.
Present.
Dr. O'Leary.
Present.
Mr. Parker.
Present.
Dr. Sutter. Dr. Sutter. Ms. Williams.
Present.
Mr. Batchelor. Mr. Batchelor. Ms. Macleay.
Present.
Ms. Burton.
Present.
Mr. O'Sullivan.
Present.
Madam President, you have quorum.
Before I continue, let me just say we did hear from Dr. Sutter and Dr. Gasoi that they will be here soon. They are held up, and Vice President Marcus Batchelor is home with the flu, so we won't be seeing him tonight. Okay, a quorum has been determined, and the State Board will proceed now with the business portion of the meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions? Seeing no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
Second.
Thank you. The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for the yeas and nays. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. The motion is approved. Members, we have the minutes from our February 5th working session before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing no changes, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The motion is approved. Okay, good evening. My name is Ruth Wattenberg. I'm the Ward 3 representative and president of the DC State Board of Education. On behalf of the members of the State Board of Ed, I welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, February 26th public meeting. The State Board holds its regularly scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month at the Old Council Chambers here at 441 4th Street Northwest. This month's meeting was shifted to accommodate the winter break in many of our schools. This meeting is broadcast live via the District Knowledge Network and also live streams via Periscope on Twitter. The video for the meeting will be posted on our YouTube page at DC SBOE as soon as it is available. Our next official meeting of the State Board is our working session on March 4th, 2020, held here at 1 Judiciary Square and broadcast on Periscope. We will begin tonight with 5 ceremonial resolutions, an honor used by the State Board to recognize organizations or individuals in the district. The State Board has been celebrating Black History Month through our social media by highlighting some of the great Black individuals that are commemorated in the names of DC schools. People like Ida B. Wells, Benjamin Banneker, Kelly Miller, and Maya Angelou made vital impacts on the history of our city and the nation. We are proud to recognize them this month and to recommit ourselves to identifying and eliminating barriers that systemic racism has established in our education system. It is good to remember those that came before us, but we better honor their legacy by continuing their fight. We will also be honoring tonight 3 outstanding DC Public School employees: Ashley Kearney, Teacher of the Year; Masi Preston, Principal of the Year; and Brandon Williams, Staff Person of the Year. Each of these individuals goes above and beyond to serve their students. We are deeply grateful for their work and pleased that they'll be able to join us tonight. Finally, we will be remembering a former member of this body, William O. Lockridge. Mr. Lockridge passed a few years ago, but his legacy of service to this city resonates still. Tonight, we will also hear from community leaders and research organizations on their upcoming fiscal year 2021 budget priorities. The State Board does not have financial or budgetary oversight or control for district public or public charter schools, but we do want to know what our communities are focused on in this budget cycle. The State Board submitted its own need for appropriations to the mayor last fall, including a number of budget enhancement requests that we believe will help us better serve residents. We invite all members of the public to testify before the Council Committee on Education about the State Board's budget on March 23rd. Individuals can sign up through the Committee on Education's website, and following that there will be budget oversight hearings for all of the major agencies in DC Education, and you can sign up to testify at all of them. Our state superintendent, who normally gives opening comments now, is not able to join us tonight as she is involved with their agency's performance oversight hearing today. So we are going to move directly to the ceremonial resolutions. Our first ceremonial resolution is CR 22, recognizing Black History Month. Is there a motion on the resolution?
So moved.
A motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been seconded. The resolution being properly moved and seconded, Mr. Hayworth will read the resolution into the record.
State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution recognizing Black History Month, CR 20-2. Whereas Black History Month in 2020 spans from February 1st to February 29th, whereas Black History Month began as Negro History Week, which was created in February 1926 by Black scholar Carter G. Woodson to ensure that students were exposed to Black history. Whereas in 1976, Black History Month was established by President Gerald Ford as a month-long celebration. Whereas Black History Month encourages the recognition of Black individuals and their roles in history, society, and culture, with a special focus on acknowledging and promoting public awareness of the Black individuals whose lives and impact on society have historically been marginalized or overlooked in traditional narratives. Whereas celebrating Black History Month increases awareness of the issues that Black communities face due to historic and current systemic racism, discrimination, and marginalization. Whereas Black History Month elevates the premise that Black people have impactful and important roles to play in promoting a fair and just society for all. And whereas the State Board of Education over the past month has highlighted and recognized district public schools named after influential Black leaders and advocates in its What's in a School Name social media campaign to honor Black History Month. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education recognizes February as Black History Month. Be it further resolved that the State Board acknowledges that while a month of formal recognition could never be enough to reverse the generational effects that oppression and marginalization have had on the Black community, celebrating Black History Month is an important step toward creating a more inclusive and just society for all.
Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion on the resolution?
Yes, I'd like to mention a couple of things. Because I spent 40 years at a school named after Francis L. Cardozo, and a lot of people don't even know who Francis L. Cardozo was. I think that it's extremely important that we celebrate Black History Month for that reason, and also the fact that in the lines 15 through 18, it talks about whose lives and impact on society have historically been marginalized or overlooked in traditional narratives. I'm old enough to have gone to in a school system in Virginia where the schools were closed, the public schools were closed rather than integrate. And I know that the textbooks that were available at that time didn't mention Black people at all. And so we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go.
Thank you. Other discussion?
Madam
Mr.
President, I would briefly just like to commend the board and my colleagues for not only the work that we have put forward, but this honor and celebration for Black History Month. I often say that while it is great to commend those who have come before us and recognize many of the names that we often hear about during this month, the greatest testimony and acknowledgement to this month and the sacrifices that Black Americans have made is to put forth policies and practices that are going to improve the lives and outcomes of Black folk, not just in DC, but across this country. And so with that, I charge the public to work with the board as we continue to try to raise equitable solutions and raise issues that are at the forefront for many communities, but disproportionately our Black communities in DC as we go from Chocolate City to maybe even Mocha City. So again, thank you for acknowledging Black History Month, and I look forward to the work ahead.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, the motion is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion carries. Thank you. I'd like to consider the next three resolutions, CR 23 for Ashley Kearney, DCPS Teacher of the Year, CR 24, Masi Preston, DCPS Principal of the Year, and CR 25, Brandon Williams, DCPS Staff Person of the Year, together. Any objection to that?
Madam President, if possible, if we could do them separately.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now you've confused me, but okay.
Were you
Yeah, that's fine.
proposing
It's
to read them all and then open the comment for all three?
fine. Yes. I mean, we can do it separately. You want to do it separately? We'll do it separately. Okay. All right. So, okay, for CR 20-3, can I have a motion for that?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Hearing no objection, Mr. Hayward, please read the resolution.
State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution recognizing Ashley Kearney as DCPS 2020 Teacher of the Year, CR 20-3. Whereas the District of Columbia Public Schools has awarded the DCPS 2020 Teacher of the Year Award to a passionate educator, Ashley Kearney, a math teacher at Ron Brown College Preparatory High School in Ward 7. Whereas Ms. Kearney, who is a native of Southeast DC, earned her bachelor's degree in sports management and business administration from the University of Tampa, as well as a master's degree in education policy from American University and a second master's in curriculum and instruction from Johns Hopkins University. Whereas she returned home to the district to begin her career in education through Teach for America in 2012, being recognized as the 2012 New Teacher of the Year, 2012 7th Grade Math Teacher of the Year, and 2012 Overall Teacher of the Year at Ron Brown Middle School. Whereas her expertise and support extend beyond the classroom, as she serves on the district professional development team, instructional leadership team at Ron Brown, and DC Educational Coalition for Change. Whereas she is committed to changing the narrative and interrupting the school-to-prison pipeline for males of color through providing scholarships, networking events, and other opportunities. And whereas she encourages her students to be successful in STEM skills as a new language for life and key to success anywhere in the world. Now therefore be it resolved that on the 26th day of February in the year 2020, the District of Columbia State Board of Education honors the excellence and commitment that Ms. Ashley Kearney provides every day to the students, teachers, staff, and community of Ron Brown High School and the District of Columbia.
Discussion first. Okay, any discussion on this?
Madam President.
Mr. Parker?
In part, the reason why I requested to separate these resolutions is, quite frankly, I think each of these honorees deserve their due. And while we have a pretty long meeting ahead of us, I do want to just take this time to acknowledge Ms. Kearney for the great work and contribution she's made to the city, to the students of Ron Brown, and to the many educators that she's had an opportunity to bless. In my professional world, when I'm wearing that hat, I've had an opportunity to witness Ms. Kearney's work up close, watching her in her classroom, watching her lead department meetings, watching her lead planning sessions. I've watched the intensity, the intentionality, the ways in which she puts equity at the forefront, not as a phrase or something to call out, but literally something that she is living. Even as recent as a few weeks ago, I think I saw on social media that she even spent some of her award money from winning this honor to put a basketball rim in the school. My bad if that's wrong. But I think that just is a testament to her work ethic and her commitment to the students of DC. And so often we have many criticisms for our schools and the systems and structures that are not working well. But tonight I just want to commend Ms. Kearney, who is my colleague, my friend, and now my Teacher of the Year, for the great work that you're doing. And I hope that you continue on for many years to come.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Ms. Williams?
I am not as eloquent as the former board member, but because I am the Ward 7 representative and spent a lot of time at Ron Brown, Mr. Wilson, and have been on the state board since that institution was established, and I've seen the impact it's had on the Ward 7 community and the students in the Ward 7 community, and I would just like to take a minute to thank you for your advocacy for our young people in the District of Columbia.
Thank you. Further, Ms. Gasoi?
I will be brief. I just want to say I wanted to congratulate you personally. I see you everywhere, and it's really impressive. I haven't, unfortunately, had the opportunity to see you in action in the classroom, and I hope to at some point. But I think I've experienced firsthand that intentionality and intensity when you grilled us as part of the deck panel during our campaign. But in all seriousness, I am really excited to present this this honor to you, and it's really clear that you deserve it. So thank you for all that you do.
Further discussion? Seeing none, the motion is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion carries. Congratulations. Wait. Oh, okay. Sorry. Next is CR 24 for Masi Preston, DCPS Principal of the Year. A motion?
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Okay. So we're out of order. The motion has been seconded, moved and seconded. Mr. Hayworth will now read the resolution into the record.
State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution recognizing Masi Preston as DCPS 2020 Principal of the Year, CR 20-4. Whereas the District of Columbia Public Schools has awarded the DCPS 2020 Principal of the Year Award to a valued educator and leader, Masi Preston, the principal at Dorothy I. Height Elementary School in Ward 4. Whereas Ms. Preston holds a master's degree in elementary education and teaching from Howard University and a second master's degree in educational administration from Trinity Washington University. Whereas she began as the principal of the Community Academy Public Charter School, successfully transitioning it to a traditional DCPS public school in 2015. Whereas under her leadership, Dorothy I. Height Elementary School has seen significant gains in math and reading scores as well as enrollment numbers. And whereas Ms. Preston is committed to supporting teachers, parents, and above all, students with integrity, passion, and love. Now therefore be it resolved that on the 26th day of February in the year 2020, the District of Columbia State Board of Education recognizes and honors the commitment and support that Ms. Masi Preston provides every day to the students, teachers, staff, and community of Dorothy I. Height Elementary School and the District of Columbia.
Thank you. Discussion on the resolution?
Yes, I'd like to congratulate Ms. Preston for the excellent work that she's done in our community for a long time, transitioning the Community Academy into a DC public high school, a public school, elementary school, Dorothy Height. And if you ever get a chance to go around and look what's going on at Dorothy Height, you'll see why she's the Principal of the Year.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Madam President, just briefly, now I feel the pressure of having to come in on all of these since I requested to separate the resolutions. I have not had the pleasure of meeting or working closely with Principal Preston, but I will say that her reputation precedes her, as many individuals that I am connected with and many leaders that I have the utmost respect for speak very highly of the work and contributions you've made to the city and to your school community. And so I will take my colleague, Representative Frazier O'Leary, up on that offer to come tour the school very soon. I would just say what it means to be Principal of the Year is not something to be taken lightly, and that I think it's an opportunity for the entire district, both charter and DCPS, to learn from the great work that's happening there, and I look forward to being part of that.
Further discussion? Seeing none, the motion is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. The motion carries. Congratulations. And third is CR 25 for Brandon Williams, DCPS Staff Person of the Year. Is there a motion for that resolution?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Okay. The motion has been made and seconded. It will now be read by Mr. Hayworth into the record.
State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution recognizing Brandon Williams as DCPS 2020 Staff Member of the Year, CR 20-5. Whereas the District of Columbia Public Schools has awarded the DCPS 2020 Staff Member of the Year Award to a dedicated public servant, Brandon Williams, the custodial foreman at John Thompson Elementary School in Ward 2. Whereas Mr. Williams has been part of the DCPS family for almost 20 years. Whereas he is committed to making John Thompson Elementary School a positive space for staff and above all, the children. Whereas he embodies the spirit and character of the Standing Ovation 2020 Award by always going the extra mile and making John Thompson Elementary School feel like home for all of its students, teachers, staff, and community. And whereas his school leadership has acknowledged how gracious, kind, and humble he is every single day, and hopes that this recognition shines a brighter light on his impact. Now therefore be it resolved that on the 26th day of February in the year 2020, the District of Columbia State Board of Education honors the hard work and service that Brandon Williams provides every day to the students, teachers, staff, and community of John Thompson Elementary School and the District of Columbia.
Thank you. Any discussion on the resolution? Mr. Jacobson?
Thank you, Madam President. Being a humble person, I won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but a school is more than just the students and teachers. The staff is so instrumental in making sure that children feel loved and welcomed and supported, and that the teachers and administrative staff have the support they need to be able to serve the children better. And you carry this honor not just for yourself, but for all of the staff folks that are standing behind the teachers, supporting them, looking out for the students, creating relationships that make the culture of the school work. And I'm just so pleased to be supporting and voting for Mr. Williams, and am just ecstatic that one of my schools brought it home. Thank you.
Further discussion? Okay, seeing none, the motion is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Congratulations. And finally, we have CR 26, the William O. Lockridge Recognition Resolution. Is there a motion on that resolution?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
The motion has, the resolution has been properly moved and seconded. Mr. Hayworth will read the resolution into the record.
State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution recognizing William O'Neill Lockridge, CR 20-6. Whereas William O'Neill Lockridge was born in November 22nd, November 22nd, 1947, in Columbia, Tennessee, attended public school in Chicago, Illinois, and graduated from Tennessee State University with a Bachelor of Arts in Education. Whereas Mr. Lockridge moved to Washington, D.C. in 1980, and in 1982 worked as a field manager for the mayoral campaign of former Carter Cabinet Secretary Patricia Roberts Harris. Whereas his experience on the campaign led him into greater community involvement, particularly in Ward 8, including the Neighborhood Planning Council, Advisory Neighborhood Commission, Parent Teachers Association, Action to Rehabilitate Housing, and the Alabama Avenue Renaissance Task Force. Whereas Mr. Lockridge served on the D.C. Board of Education and D.C. State Board of Education with distinction for over 20 years. Whereas the drive and dedication demonstrated by Mr. Lockridge helped to establish the State Board of Education as the public's voice in the district education policy landscape. Whereas Mr. Lockridge built lasting partnerships to assist the students of Ward 8, including building vocational programming that enabled many to secure careers to provide for their families after leaving the public school system. Whereas these partnerships also included donations of 33,000 books to Ward 8 schools. And whereas in honor of Mr. Lockridge's many accomplishments, the public library in the Bellevue neighborhood of Ward 8 was renamed for him in 2012. Now therefore be it resolved that the D.C. State Board of Education remembers with great respect William O'Neill Lockridge and his lasting legacy in the promotion of equitable education in the District of Columbia. And be it further resolved that the State Board continues to be guided by the positive influence of William O. Lockridge's leadership as Vice President and his dedication to the needs of our most vulnerable students.
Thank you. Discussion?
Madam President.
Yes, Mr. Parker.
On behalf of our colleague, Representative Batchelor, I just want to thank the family, the Lockridge family, for continuing to champion Mr. Lockridge's legacy. Recently, I had an opportunity to participate in a Dancing with the Scholars competition, which is an annual fundraiser used to raise funds to continue the many contributions that the Lockridge family, but in particular Mr. Lockridge, has made to the Ward 7 and Ward 8 community, and I can attest to the living legacy that he has. And so for that, I appreciate this resolution and look forward to participating in next year's competition as well.
Other conversation, discussion? Okay, Owen?
I just wanted to piggyback on what he said, because I have participated in the Dancing with the Stars Scholarship dance competition, and I always thought it was rigged because Ward 8 always won. I don't care who was dancing, but I knew Mr. Lockridge. I had met him, and he was a voice to be heard in our community. And I just would like to say that Wanda, his wife, has done a wonderful job in continuing his legacy.
Thank you. Any further conversation? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, the motion is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The State Board is going to take a short recess of about 5 minutes to present the resolutions to our Teacher, Principal, and Staff Person of the Year, and then we will be back here for public comment.
Gavel.
One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much. And we'll do one more with just Masino. Brandon is not here. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. you so much. Sure, did you send it to us electronically? Yes. Yeah, then we already have it. So, yeah, thank you so much. We'll take it. Thank you.
Okay, the meeting of the State Board will come to order. The State Board welcomes public participation in activities under our authority. At every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. Your comments will become part of our official record. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak at a future public meeting, please contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by calling 202-741-0388. Tonight we have 18 public witnesses. If witnesses have provided written comments for the record, they are available on our website. And now I'm going to call them, but I don't have my page, right?
Page 9.
Okay. As I call your name, please come down to the table. I'm going to call 5 people at a time. Phoebe Dillard, Dana Richard, Richard, Valerie Jablow, Elizabeth Miller, Warren Gorlick. Is that it?
I don't know what you want to do because we've sorted them, but next 3,
Okay.
they're just not going to be in the same
Okay.
orders anymore.
Did any of these need to be together? Oh.
Yeah, the first 3 panels were all supposed to be together. So we can go to the end and call the other 2.
We're trying to keep groups together, so that's just, give us a moment here. Call these 2.
So these are folks from the Ward 5 about all 4 of these are with I'm trying to let my brain work.
All right, but
The
this
bus-
one,
bus
so we
count,
can't do that. So should I just call 2 more?
Sure.
But these people all want to be together?
Yep, but it is what it is.
Or can I just,
They're
all 6 of them? So why don't I just do these 2? Can I do that?
Sure, you do whatever you want.
Okay, we're going to start with these 2, and then we'll move on to another panel. Okay. You each have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that you must use your mic. Your mic is already on. The light on the table will be green for the first 2.5 minutes. Will turn yellow for the last 30 seconds, and will turn red after 3 minutes have elapsed.
Hi, my name is Phoebe Dillard, and I teach at Ballou Senior High School. Seeing my school have a 1-star rating was a jarring experience for me. I was hired to start a theater program from scratch at Ballou High School, and though the journey has not been easy, I have had so much support from my students, families, staff, faculty, and administration that has made it possible, and it has shown amazing positive effects at Ballou. Just because my students live in a low-income area and go to a school that has a 1-star rating does not mean that they aren't entitled to a first-class arts education. I didn't choose to work at Ballou because of a rating. I chose to work at Ballou because I love my kids, and there are opportunities at this school that cannot be captured by a star rating. I believe that parents need to see student experiences and choice at schools before deciding on a school for their family. At every professional development, there are consistent workshops and lectures on building positive relationships with students, as there should be. And though the Panorama Survey captures some of this idea, it should be accounted for at a higher rate. Something that has benefited our entire school this year is the redesign program. This program is not only an integral part of building a better Ballou, but has already taken action steps to involve the community in our decision-making processes, get their opinion on what needs to be improved, and have put action plans into place to better student experiences, such as the new IT training program that is coming next year. Are programs like these that are bettering the growth of the school included in the star rating system? Are extracurricular and support programs such as SEL and arts programs a factor in the star rating system? How can OSSI serve to help schools with low ratings? Both Connected Schools and Redesign are powered through DCPS, and we are extremely grateful that they are providing resources and people to better our programs, student experiences, and community engagement. As a teacher, I do everything for my kids. My world at school revolves around them, and every question I ask about operations, logistics, resources goes back to how is it serving my students. I would never want my students to think that they go to a bad school because of a star rating system. They are learning, they are engaging, they are loved, and they are good kids. The more we bog down school communities with blanket statements and grades, the more we shield ourselves from what good is coming from that school and where we can go to make it better. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Jablow?
Hi, I'm Valerie Jablow, a Duke Ellington High School parent. I'm testifying about the transfer of the school's field from DCPS to DPR. This event should be of grave concern to you, as it is the first time that an asset of an active DCPS school being used for credited programming for students at that school has been taken away from that school for the immediate and lasting benefit of those not necessarily affiliated with DCPS. The Ellington Field is used by Duke Ellington High School for PE, track, band, flag football, and other school activities. The mayor transferred Ellington Field to DPR because DPR gave Mireya, a private school, 9 more years of prime hours at Jelliff, a public field near Duke Ellington. The idea was that Ellington Field would stand in for Jelliff and become a general use DPR facility. Despite outcries from parents and staff alike, the Ellington Field transfer happened last week. No one from DCPS or DPR informed my school. Now that DCPS has no legal right to what had once been its own asset, we have no knowledge of how Duke Ellington High School will be able to use the field because DPR has refused to divulge its use agreement with DCPS. Worse, a February 20th online statement by the Deputy Mayor for Education says that the field is for DCPS, quote, extracurricular activities, unquote, thus jeopardizing Duke Ellington's credited programming there. This is nothing new. DPR refused to meet with Ellington parents and staff before the transfer to ensure that if the school's programming at the field can continue, that the school's programming at the field can continue not only for this school year, but into forthcoming school years. And DPR held only one public meeting before the transfer, during which no one said they thought the transfer was a good idea, except people employed by the mayor. All we have now for an agreement is draft language promulgated by DPR, which gives no assurance that Duke Ellington High School would have first priority of 3 DCPS schools promised priority use at that field, Duke Ellington, along with Hardy Middle School and Walls High School. That reduces the public school that has controlled that field for almost a century to just another entity wanting some outdoor space. It also forces 1,500 students at those 3 DCPS schools to compete against one another for time at Ellington Field, disproportionately disadvantaging Duke Ellington, the only school to offer credited programming there. Sadly, DCPS retaining ownership of Ellington Field was never even considered, despite longstanding agreements between DCPS and DPR regarding DCPS pools. Those agreements show that the pools are clearly DCPS assets intended for DCPS students that happen to be used by DPR, not the other way around, as here. I can only ask now that you understand the terrible precedent that this transfer has set. This DCPS asset is being used for credit by students at an active DCPS school. It has now been taken away without the school's full knowledge, consent, or any consideration of the school's actual use of it, and without any assurance the school's credited programming can continue there. We have thus just allowed this and future mayors to take anything from DCPS at any time for any reason. You as education stewards need to be alarmed by this and proactive about it going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move to questions, I saw Dana Richard walk in, I believe, if he would like to come up. And also if Eric Langenbacher is here. And then you guys just stay, and then we'll have questions, and then. Thank you. You have 3 minutes. Your mic should be on, and when you have 30 seconds left, the yellow light will go on. You may go. Thank you.
It's on.
Good evening, board members and Madam President. I'm here to supplement my written statement, which you have, and with 2 exhibits. Interscholastic and intercollegiate athletics are vital, integral components of a traditional public education and are now available to male and female students, including all the foundational sports, which are swimming, track and field, gymnastics, and wrestling. They are the oldest, most enduring fitness-oriented sports and curricular activities. They belong in each DC public and charter school, including as sanctioned sports for girls and women in DC middle and high schools and colleges. All the foundation sports. DCPS, charter schools, UDC are integral partners in what must be a high quality public education. They mutually benefit by playing companion roles in boosting enrollments, revenue, and overall educational experience. Fully, equitably restoring traditional fitness, foundational sports to DC public schools, including as girls' women's varsity sports, will require efforts and team efforts among the various agencies involved. Wrestling is among the oldest of scholastic, NCAA, and Olympic sports. It's a sponsored high school sport in every public school system in the U.S., public high school system, except Mississippi and D.C. And it's considered the foundation sport because it uniquely improves skills in all other sports. Let's see. Wrestling has remained for the past 3 years the fastest growing sport for female student athletes, K through college, and is now a state-sponsored girls' sport in 20 U.S. states. This year, it became a sanctioned NCAA sport for women in D1 and D2, and a favorable vote is anticipated for Division I in April. So there is a proliferation of scholarships as well as fitness and self-defense opportunities for girls and women that did not exist a year ago and did not exist 3 years ago for boys or girls outside of middle school. So There has been also a proliferation of college teams for women, now 83 in the country. And the colleges find that this boosts enrollments. And that's because there are far disproportionately more high school participants than at the college level. So I just, the time is
Time is up. Yeah, time is up.
Can I conclude?
Quickly, yes, thank you.
Okay. In early 2019, 10 DCPS high schools expressed interest in establishing wrestling teams after 2 successful middle school seasons that the DCIAA DCPS brought back in 2017. But it did not happen. Purportedly, it was not in the budget. So I don't know where these middle school kids go to school now, but they are going to be looking at a variety of schools. So I urge the State Board to find a way to facilitate the establishment of foundation sports for boys and girls.
Thank you, Mr. Gorlick. Okay, I'm Mr. Richard. And Mr. Gorlick, would you like to, you have 3 minutes, and when you have 30 seconds left, the yellow light will go on.
Thank you. I'm here to talk about the Jello Field situation. My name is Warren Gorlick. I have twin daughters who graduated last May from the DCPS school system. They had a remarkably good education here with DCPS, first at John Eaton, then at Deal Middle School, and finally at School Without Walls, where they graduated last May. However, there was one part of their educational experience that was not a success, and that relates to soccer, which both of my daughters enjoyed playing, but they gave up on the sport because they lacked a reliable playing field. Their assigned practice field at Hearst Elementary was shared by so many teams, it was sometimes dangerous, and practices were canceled about 20% of the time due to flooding and drainage issues. Matches with other teams were often scheduled far away, well into Montgomery County. I would note that while some private schools, such as Visitation, generously allowed public school students to use their fields for matches, not once were our children permitted to use the public Jello field a mere mile from our house and a mere mile from Deal and School Without Walls. And that's because of the fact that Jello has been under contract during the most in-demand after-school hours to the private school, Mireya, since 2009. The lack of properly scaled playing fields in the city is not a new issue, and that's why it was particularly surprising that the Department of Parks and Recreation extended this contract for another 9 years, meaning that the public Jello field, one of the few properly scaled turf playing fields in Northwest DC, will be used by only one small private school after school in the spring and fall for nearly 20 years. I would note the irony that when Hardy became the designated middle school for many children who were formerly in Boundary at Deal, Councilmember Che assured the parents that Hardy could be and would be just as good a school as Deal. We now have a situation where Deal students have continued access to large playing fields after school, while Hardy students have only a small play space, less than half the size of Jello, where many teams are forced to compete for practice time. Finally, I want to address the misleading and inaccurate talking points used almost verbatim by the Mireya administration and parent supporters. Mireya focuses on the fact that they have only exclusive access for 10% of the time. If Mireya thinks that the after-school hours are so unimportant, I'd suggest that they consider switching to 7 to 9 p.m. and allow Hardy and other public school students the prime hours immediately after classes end. I would also note one other thing, that is the small amount of money that Mireya puts up for the space, approximately $105,000 per year, a deal that values the Jello field at 67% less than its 2009 value, may be the only property in DC to devalue so significantly. There was no competitive bidding, no attempt to accommodate the public schools, and no public comment on the proposed contract. It was structured in a deliberate way for 9 years to avoid any kind of council review. I hope the State Board of Education will push the council to act immediately so that all contracts on public fields are subject to council approval to avoid another fiasco in the future. Thank you for allowing me to testify before you today.
Thank you, and we have one more, Elizabeth Miller. And let me just say, thank you for having patience. We had two groups that asked to be kept together, and that's what we're trying to do. So I think we've now more or less accomplished it. Okay, Ms. Miller.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Miller, and I'm an ANC commissioner in Georgetown. The Jelliff Recreation Center and adjacent turf playing fields are in my district. Hyde-Addison Elementary School and Hardy Middle School are located in our greater ANC district. The Jelliff Recreation Center and Field were purchased by the city in 2009. Immediately afterward, the Department of Parks and Recreation entered into a sole source no bid contract with a private Mireya school whereby the school would renovate the field and the swimming pool in exchange for exclusive access to the field during 100% of the most in-demand after-school hours for 10 years. The contract was up for extension last July. Hardy Middle School, which is located directly across the street from the field, and a number of other organizations worked very diligently to try to have this field shared more equitably. But in a sort of shocking move, the contract between the city and the school was extended for an additional 9 years, meaning that one small private school located in Ward 3 with 40% non-DC residents will control after-school time on this very highly desired Ward 2 public field for an entire generation of students, a total of almost 20 years. The unprecedented solution put forth by the Department of Parks and Rec and Mayor Bowser was to take nearby Duke Ellington Field out of the DCPS inventory and move it to DPR and prioritize it for nearby schools, 2 public high schools and 1 public middle school. So the small private Mireya school stays on the Jelliff Field, not having to share with any other school, public or private, and 2 public DC high schools and 1 public middle school will be forced to compete for time on 1 public field. It makes no sense to me. I strongly recommend that you take a position on this issue and work with the DC Council to write comprehensive legislation to reverse this controversial deal and allow Jelliff Field to be shared more equitably and also close the loophole that allowed this to happen in the first place. Keeping in mind, I am not a professional legislator nor a lawyer, I propose the following. Number 1, eliminate the $1 million threshold for council review. All public-private partnerships on former and current DCPS and DPR properties in whatever contractual form they may take and for whatever amount should be subject to council review. In the case of Mireya, they were able to secure an additional 9 years of use on a public field for pennies on the true value because the contract appears to be designed to evade council approval. Number 2, insist on a competitive and transparent RFP process that prioritizes putting as many DC school children on DC public fields as possible. Number 3, a cost-benefit analysis of the partnership should be conducted by an outside auditor. It is clear in the case of the Mireya deal, no consideration was given to the financial costs of busing students from Hardy to fields across the city versus using a public field located directly across the street. And the cost of missing classes at the end of the school day to board a bus to cross town for a practice or a game is actually immeasurable. We can all agree properly scaled playing fields in DC are too scarce, and public fields should be prioritized for public use, and deals that favor small private institutions over the greater public should not be allowed to continue. I urge you all to commit to help DC public school families and advocate for us with the council. Public fields should be shared, especially during the most in-demand after-school hours. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now take comments and questions from board members. Ms. Sutter?
Thank you all for your testimony. I want to start with Ms. Dillard. Ms. Dillard, you mentioned that programs that like the redesign and the arts programs that are in service of bettering the school are not included in the STAR system. And it sounds like from your testimony, you wonder if they ought to be. If that's right, how would you recommend we do that?
I think I want you guys to look at how they are being implemented and what they are affecting. And I would hope that that would positively or negatively, depending on how they are being implemented, affect the STAR rating. So in terms of like amount, like a quantifiable amount of like how much that they contribute to that score, I think it just would be dependent on you all's thoughts. But obviously those programs are having a huge effect, especially with like the redesign program that is bringing in so many different programs. I would think that it should have a bigger quantifiable amount that would affect the STAR rating. I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Ms. Jablow, I would ask next a question of you, a Ward 6 constituent. You mentioned the pools, and I have a question about that because I would say that this was news to me, that they, for instance, Wilson remains under DCPS control while being operated by DPR.
I don't know about Wilson.
Okay.
So why I know about the pools is because at the end of December, I submitted a FOIA request to DCPS and a separate FOIA request to DPR for agreements that cover shared assets. And I specifically wanted agreements about fields because, as you know, in Ward 6, the Watkins field is actually a DPR field.
Correct.
And it was designed that way. It was always owned by DPR, and it was intended to be a rec center. And I thought this was a slam dunk thing. In fact, before I made the FOIA request, I had spoken briefly to Patrick Davis, the COO of DCPS, who had been in charge of facilities, and he said, oh, we got lots of those agreements. And I thought, oh, this will be easy. Well, it wasn't. And the only thing I got was a partially fulfilled FOIA request from DPR, and it was only for pools. And the pools that it was for included Marie Reed, Ballou, Woodson, not Wilson. But of those, at least a few are used as rec centers.
Okay.
So it was very clear that these are DCPS assets. They are maintained by DPR through contractual relationships between DCPS and DPR, i.e. DCPS is paying on the order of about $600,000 to $700,000 every year to DPR to take care of these pools solely for the use of DCPS students at DCPS's scheduling.
Okay.
And then after that, DPR does whatever they want.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that clarification.
Hi, thank you all for your testimony. I too will start with you. Tell me your name again.
Phoebe Dillard.
Ms. Dillard, thank you so much. So I'm going to sort of continue the question that my colleague asked. And one of the things that we are thinking about is actually having a dashboard rather than a star rating system. And so if you could imagine not having stars, so what you were talking about was including some criteria that would be quantifiable. But if you didn't have to quantify it, are there criteria that you would want to see on the report card related to arts, related to sort of initiatives schools are taking to improve?
Yes, 100%. Similar to what I deal with in my theater classroom, a lot of principals, when I go in for an interview, say, okay, how can you judge how good a performance is, right? Because you and I can both go into a performance and have very different opinions of it. So how am I going to grade this performance? And the easy answer is with a rubric. So I think it's the questions and not necessarily the measuring device. So certain questions like one day at my school, our behavior team, just as soon as every kid entered, just said, do you feel loved? Do you feel like you belong at this school? And I feel like we shy away a lot of times from these kind of like lovey-dovey questions when really that's ideally what we do as teachers is that's why we're in it, right? Is because we love our students, we love what we do, and we do want our students to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel loved, because that's the only environment that they're going to be able to learn in and to feel safe in, to be able to learn and to feel vulnerable. So I think that if there were more questions like that, I think that would be very helpful. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Really quickly, Ms. Jablow, I guess I'm just wondering, given the situation, which even though the specifics are different, sounds really familiar in terms of how it's handled, where there isn't real engagement with community and something happens where everybody is shocked and nobody approves, and I shouldn't say nobody, but the community in general doesn't approve. But is there anything right now that should be happening? Sorry, this is to you, Ms. Jablow. Sorry. What can we do to advocate at this point now that it seems like it's a done deal?
I think what Elizabeth Miller said about pushing for that legislation is really important. At the same time, be aware that this can happen at other schools. And I would never ask for another school to have this situation, because it's very unpleasant, I can tell you, to be sort of the last people to know. And it's been very unpleasant for parents and kids and staff. It's really needless. You shouldn't have to wonder whether you're going to have an asset, at the end of the week. I think it's pretty simple.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion? Oh, sorry, Ashley?
Yes.
Very quick.
No. It's Ashley.
Very quickly, I just want to say, Mr. Gorlick, thank you very much for, the gentleman
I'm Gorlick.
You're Gorlick? Okay, I apologize.
Don't want to thank you.
Richard, excuse me, I apologize. I want to say thank you very, very much for all of the information that you provided on and the resolution, especially the task force who helped to put together the resolution on wrestling, the statistics, especially the resolution for adding women's wrestling as a women's sport in DCPS schools. As a longtime member of one of those foundational sports, I did gymnastics from the age of 3 until college, and then coached through college. I've seen the need for women's sports and foundational sports at all levels, and I greatly appreciate your comments today. If there's anything I can help with and assist in the future, please let me know.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. O'Leary?
Yes, as someone who coached for over 40 years in DCPS and had to deal with all these field problems and things like that, I empathize and support you completely. We at the State Board of Education don't have the power to make these kinds of changes. You, and I'm not just talking to the people on the panel, we have to, as a city, stand up and not allow these things to happen. All right, we've had in the last couple of months, Washington Med has been closed. Community didn't want it. The council voted against it. Spingarn, if you didn't know what happened to Spingarn after it was closed, look it up on YouTube. It's a city tragedy. And the fact that Jelliff's Field is not allowed to be used by DCPS, and Hardy's right across the street, and the fact that Ellington is, there's a fight, there shouldn't be any fight for kids to be able, for school children to be able to play on those fields at any time, but somebody's gaming us. And we can't as a community allow this to happen. And I'd like y'all to respond to that. I'm just saying what you said.
Thank you. I want to thank you for that. And I think we have been advocating, and we're just here tonight to ask you to join us. If you're having a cup of coffee with a council member, we ask you to bring this issue up. If you're talking to residents, we ask you to bring this up. We just don't want to let this go. I think it's important as a city that we stand up and say that our public fields should be prioritized for public use.
I agree, but there needs to be more civic action besides having a cup of coffee with the council member. I mean, it's got to be out there so that we're enraged when our children are being hurt like
well,
this.
It's been out there. We've got a change.org petition with 3,000 signatures on it. So I mean, it's out there definitely. So I think
it's not a secret,
yeah.
But there has to be a step higher than this.
Thank you.
Can I just say one more suggestion? So when we've approached various council members, a number of council members, they say, well, we're very sympathetic, but a contract's a contract, and now we're locked in for the next 10 years. So I would say two things. First, there apparently may be a process to overturn it nonetheless. And second, I think this behooves us. This was a contract that was entered into, as Ms. Miller just said, through a non-transparent, closed-door process. There was no public input. Whoever was involved at the Department of Parks and Recreation really should not be allowed to be engaging in this kind of nefarious activities anymore. So I would, to the extent that, as Ms. Miller was saying, talking to people, there needs to be better oversight of the Department of Parks and Recreation. We're trying, but we're asking you all to use whatever power you do have. We recognize it's somewhat limited on these issues as well.
Mr. Parker.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening. I have three very quick questions. In part, I'm hoping to just be better educated about this issue. And I must say, there's a certain level of irony that I'm experiencing at a time, not to minimize the issue at all, but at a time where some of our charters are fighting to find facilities in general, at a time where schools are underfunded and we're losing teachers, at a time when schools are underfunded and don't have like basic necessities. That comes at a tension when, for me at least, what I'm hearing is that while all of those baseline expectations are in place, there are some others which should be part of our baseline expectations that are not being met. I think on the flip side, what I'm also hearing is that there is a common thread of disregard for community feedback and output and a lack of communication from those in positions of power to make decisions. So the three, I just wanted to name that because I'm having a hard time just reconciling some of this. One is, if you could just mention the council members that you said explicitly asked, and in particular, Ms. Jablow, you mentioned that the council asked for a meeting, but...
Right, that was Alyssa Silverman and Mary Che.
Thank you. Second question, do you have any knowledge of whether school leadership has insight as to when the school can use the field? And that's for anybody that may have this insight. Or is it just that the parents and public don't know, or even the school is unclear?
The school doesn't know. No, so I think this week only DPR reached out to one staff member at Duke Ellington to talk about this going forward. But they announced this on November 14th. So we're now at February 26th, and that was the handshake. There's no excuse for that. I would hope you would agree.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then my other question was simply like, what was the status quo before this agreement? So if you could just educate me on that. So Duke Ellington had its own field, and the other schools in question, Hardy and there was another school.
School Without Walls High School.
School Without Walls. What was the status quo for those schools and their sports teams?
So I am, like my colleague down here, a former Walls parent. My son graduated in 2019. And so, yes, Walls doesn't have a field. It never was intended to have a field. It was intended to be a school without walls. The kids were outside of the building for part of the day, every day. So as a result, the kids who are on sports teams at Walls travel a lot. and my son was on sports teams. So there is that. As far as Duke Ellington goes, I am a freshman parent there, so I am not very well versed on this, but I do know that it is used by the school, and that if other DCPS schools want to use it, they just need to reach out to the staff member who's in charge of the field to have that use during times that the school's not using it. But I would encourage you to get more specific answers, to reach out to Duke Ellington, and specifically the manager of the field, Javel Branch, and I am happy to email you her contact information.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Hardy has a play space. They do not have a field. And as Mayor Bowser said, we want every middle school in the city to be an Alice Deal. And in order for Hardy to become an Alice Deal, it needs fields. And the field right across the street, the Jella Field, needs to be used by Hardy, as does Ellington. These schools don't have one little tiny team. They're trying to field a lacrosse team, a girls softball team, a boys baseball team. And that's just Jella, and I'm not even naming what they are. I'm sorry, that's just Hardy, and I'm not even naming what they have in total. That's not counting Ellington and Walls. And so when you start adding up all of these teams between 3 schools and a marching band or whatever else you want in these fields, there's not enough public fields, period, let alone if we take one of them totally off and give it to a private school. So there's not enough field space, period, for public schools, let alone when we take one totally off the books. So,
thank you.
Yes.
To this, I think one of the things is that there's not an emphasis placed on, a big enough emphasis placed on sports in the DC schools. There are a lot of fields when you consider parks and recreation. There's fields everywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. We do need to move on at this point. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I've got Mr. Jacobson and then Mr. O'Sullivan.
I defer to my colleague.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony. First, I just wanted to speak on, in my opinion, I think it's important that we stop allowing, to me, what seems like financial loopholes and just private greed somewhat, to deny students, DC students, right to an outdoor field. That's extremely important to me. I know it's important to a lot of people just to have an outdoor field. I think that's a fundamental part of getting a rounded education. And I commend all of you for the work you've done on that issue. And I wanted to direct my question towards you, Ms. Dillard. You talked about what a 1-star rating can do to a student, and specifically people who say are in theater and they like their experience, but then they're all of a sudden being told their school is 1 star. What do you think that does to a psychological effect? What do you think that does to a student?
So it's about a reputation, right? And so that 1 star not only identifies that school, but a lot of our students associate their identity with our school. And so now they're saying to themselves, it's not my school that's a 1-star rating, it's me. And something that contributes to a school, obviously, are going to be its students. So as a student, especially for our freshmen who may be unfamiliar with the system, I really hope they're not asking themselves, is it me? Is it us? Is it, and then that furthers the question, is it because of, is it because we're in a low-income neighborhood? Is it because we don't have certain resources? I mean, the list could go on, and I think that that does absolutely nothing but negative effects to a student's psyche. And I would never want my children to think that they are 1 star, oh my God, you know what I mean? And unfortunately, it doesn't just take me as their teacher saying, no, you're not 1 star. It takes so much more to change that child's mind into thinking that. And we can try as much as we can on the school level to build that child up and say, no, it doesn't matter. But as soon as that stamp goes down on that school, then unfortunately, all of those students may think that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you all for coming out and advocating tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm not a sports guy. I was in golf for 1 year in high school because I wanted to join the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and so I had to be in something. I'm more of a theater and arts background, but I understand the importance of being outside, and I think this is a bigger issue than a single field. I think in Ward 2, we've had several instances over the last 3 years where green space has disappeared. Condos have gone up, apartment buildings, et cetera, but the city hasn't been proactive on trying to identify green space and preserve that green space for the city. And when I say for the city, I'm talking about our students, certainly, and other city uses. So my grandmother used to always say they're not building any more land, and they're not. So we have to be really smart about how we're using open space and outdoor space, and we need to make sure our council members understand the importance of this. What I would suggest, rather than getting into the weeds on this particular piece, Madam President, is I'd suggest we invite DCPS and DPR representatives here to give us an overview of how they and joint overview of how they control outdoor space and fields like Jelliff, like Ellington. And I think that would be great to have on the record. And if they decline our invitation, I think that speaks volumes as well. And then if we want to write a letter, we can, or weigh in after that conversation, or if that conversation never occurs because they decline to, then we can follow up with a letter. Would that be acceptable, Commissioner, and other representatives who are here from the community?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Could we start, I'm suggesting that as a board, we start by inviting DCPS and DPR to one of our meetings, public meetings, to jointly testify about how they share and prioritize field space.
Yeah, that sounds like a great
idea. And then if they decline to join us, or after that, if it's still warranted, then we move forward with the suggestions that you've made, Commissioner, in terms of what could go in a letter and what
good.
We should.
I have a long list of questions you can ask.
And we'd like to see that, certainly. For the folks that are here on the field, I've got 20 seconds left if anyone has an additional comment or thought.
The Deputy Mayor for Education often said in public meetings that he thought DPR was the, quote, more credible, unquote, agency for fields. And I think that was a direct hit on DCPS, as DCPS manages its fields beautifully in other places.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're done.
Ms. Williams?
I'd just like to piggyback on what my colleague said about we need to look at the comprehensive plan for the city and add that to that agenda to see what is planned for these areas, open and what spaces are closed down. Somehow I got tricked into doing some of that work, and it's a document about that big, but, that's
I was just looking at mine today. It is.
Yeah.
I have it. I was like, what am I going to do with this? Yeah.
Because there's a concern everywhere in the city with the influx of different people to the city, the way the buildings are going up, that how this will impact not only the fields, but our living space in general. So I think we ought to.
It is in the comprehensive plan. There's sections, which I will get to all of you, long news sections about public-private partnerships on these fields. And so again, I think that's another place we need to tread very carefully and make sure that partnerships are actually win-win and not like these, which I think are not win-win for everybody involved.
Okay, it's my turn to comment. So first, let me say to Ms. Dillard, thank you very much for your comments. I'm not going to take time to comment on it, but I do want to say that the board is going to be looking at the star rating and possible modifications, alternatives to it, starting this spring. So be on the lookout. I think we're scheduled, at least tentatively, for something in June. It could even happen earlier. So we look forward to that discussion. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Jacobson. I think that's a terrific idea. And just looking around at my colleagues, I was getting a lot of nods. So I think we will try to do that and try to hear from them and get on the record what is going on. I will say a couple of things. I agree with Ms. Jablow that we should be alarmed. I think it is alarming when schools have to compete for each other to be able to play their sports. To Mr. Parker's point, I'm very curious to know how many schools in the city are without playing fields, or how many schools have to compete for the playing fields like this. My experience is that schools have their fields, and they can use them as they need to. And insofar as that is not the case, we do need to look at that. And we also need to keep in mind that while it might have been true 20 years ago that there had to be all kinds of different deals in order to bring our city, which was in bad financial shape, the kinds of deals it needed to improve the parks, that's not the case anymore. And that is not how we should be looking at this, whether it's these fields and these schools or anywhere else. So I will be very interested to find out about that and to raise that when these folks come. And we'll be very pleased to get your list of questions. And I do also just want to say that this issue of the transparency, I mean, I've been hearing about this for a while, and this issue about the transparency, and people have talked about it with regard to other schools and public-private partnerships, and it is a problem, and it really needs to be looked at it. So I thank you for sounding the alarm. We will have a panel and potentially do a board letter, or individuals will do letters. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I don't know if you have a bicycle.
Yeah.
I did.
Our next panel will be Eric Langenbacher, Michelle Flores.
Eric has the flu.
Thank you.
All right.
Michelle Flores, Luz López, Daniel Motta, Isabella Sanchez. Samuel Cuadro. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. As with the previous panel, you will have 3 minutes each to present testimony, and then the board members will have 2 minutes for questions after that. We'll begin, your microphone should be on, so we'll begin here with Ms. Lopez.
Good evening. Yes, my name is Luz Mireya Peláez López. I came from Colombia, South America, with my husband and my 2 children with a temporary J1 visa to teach Spanish in DC. We were looking for a better future for our children and better opportunities to grow as professionals. Getting away from our customs, a family life, and our positions as professionals in our country was not easy. I am very grateful for the support that district has given me in sponsoring my new temporary J1 visa. However, this is a temporary visa. Thank you to Empower Ed for inviting me to participate with my testimony today in this important meeting and to join forces for a better future for the Latino community in DC. Currently, I work as a pre-K dual language teacher at Mary Read Elementary School. I'm also co-chair of the WTU Task Force to support Latinx teachers. The first school I worked at when I arrived to DC was in 2016 at a charter school. There I taught all subjects in Spanish to second grade children. My salary was very low with respect to the cost of living in DC. Many charter schools have large Latinx student populations. They need to have higher starting salaries if they value Latinx educators. Next, I joined DCPS as a dual language teacher. I worked at Houston Elementary Public School located in Ward 7 at its opening of the dual program in the pre-K. The school only had 2 teachers who spoke Spanish throughout the school during 2017-2018 school period. I was one of those teachers. No one in the school administration spoke Spanish. The person who observed my classes for impact did not know Spanish and did not know anything about my culture. Only my lead coach spoke Spanish and was the person with whom I could share my ideas and concerns 2 half days in the week when she was there. Currently, I serve as a teacher at Mary Read as a dual language teacher in pre-K total immersion in Spanish. Mary Read captivated me for their diverse and friendly community. There, I have had the opportunity to meet teachers from different cultures, and few teachers are Latino. Some tensions and one of the main challenges that Latino teachers face when they arrive in DC is to complete the teacher certification as teachers. I have a master in bilingual education from my country and 15 years teaching in bilingual schools and universities in Colombia. In the United States, I will have 4 years teaching in dual language programs. Despite bringing our titles and extensive experience as teachers in our countries, Latino teachers must meet additional and mandatory requirements such as OSCE teacher certification and high cuts of praxis exams. There are many things we can do to improve this situation. We are reaching dialogues with district leaders asking for more support in the recruitment and retention processes of Latino teachers. 2 days ago, we met with the Chancellor, Dr. Ferebee, and discussed with him recommendations to overcome all these challenges in the retention and recruitment of Latinx educators. We will also lead a session on overcoming challenges of Latinx educators in DCPS at the WTU Shared Vision Conference this Saturday. We need your support to review and improve the processes that I mentioned before, such as the permanent sponsorship of Latino teachers instead of temporary visas, also to adapt exams that are made to us, to our language and culture in order to obtain that teacher certification with OSCE, and also to incorporate our experience and cultural competence in the elaboration of educational material for the schools.
Ms. Lopez, are you nearly done?
I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
Putting together our forces and voices, we can achieve this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Mr. Motta?
Yes. Hi, my name is Daniel Motta. I'm a bilingual and Latin American teacher here in DC at a public charter school not too far, Mundo Verde Bilingual. Recently, we unionized at our school and asked for better teaching conditions, better working conditions, and better conditions for our students to be learning in. As a bilingual teacher in the city, or when I even think about what made me become a bilingual teacher or propelled me to become a teacher, I start thinking about the frustrations, isolations, the anxiety, the type of threat that I felt, especially in academic settings, that I saw throughout my college experience. I came from a public school system near the city of Chicago that's mainly Latino, 60% of immigrant population. I think about the English language lexicon. I think about the high level of vocabulary that I heard in class. I think about the eloquence that my classmates were able to present and express opinions on when it came to even trivial subjects. And it felt like they were ahead on every level. I began to put up walls as a student, and I thought of how folks were different, about how there's these and those people that were different from me. And I naturally am a person that wants to build bridges amongst folks. So these thoughts came to boil and clash within me. And I wasn't able to fully articulate what it was then, but looking back, I now see how many privileges, opportunities, and experiences that weren't really afforded to me or many of my classmates growing up, going through elementary school, middle school, high school. And one of the privileges that comes to mind is one of the issues that we're raising here, and that's that when I remember walking around in high school and not seeing any teachers, staff, or folks that really looked like me, really spoke like my family, who could relate at a different level. And here in DC, we have, I'm gonna look at the statistic. Here in the city, about 7% of city teachers are Latino or Latinx, and 19% of them, 7% of city teachers are Latinx, and 19% of students identify as Latinx. That's most exaggerated in Ward 1, where we have 15% of teachers that are Latinx and a population of 58% Latinx students. This is an issue that in DC we need to prioritize, and I'm sure that we're not going to be able to solve this here, but it's something that I consider very important in my heart, and something that I want my students to be able to see expressed in their lives as well, because of the connection that we can make. I brought like 2 little packets. I'm not gonna fully read this testimony, but there's a packet of suggestions that I bring personally, but there's also a report, and I'm not sure how to maybe submit this to you all, but it's something that we've been working and seeing with Empower Ed, which provides a list of suggestions potentially that can be made policy or publicly, and obviously I'm looking, and if there's any communications or any connections that we can make here to advance all these efforts, we'd really appreciate.
Thank you. If you'd like to email it to us, we'll submit it for our record.
Sure.
Ma'am?
Good evening. I'm Isabella Sanchez. I'm a 4th grade math and literacy teacher at H.D. Cook Elementary, school in Ward 1. I'm also here as Empower Ed's Ward 1 Fellow. In this role, I focused on an issue that's really important to me as a former Latinx student and a current Latinx teacher, but also an issue that I feel hasn't gotten as much attention in the policy world, and that's the recruitment and the retention of our Latinx teachers. The Latinx teacher to student representation gap in DC is sizable. I'm going to repeat some statistics here, but we serve a 19% Latinx student population, but our teaching staff is only 7% Latinx. And this is just a 12% representation gap overall, but when we look at wards 1 and ward 4, it's a much bigger gap. In ward 1, the gap is 30%, sorry, it's 30% in ward 4, and it's 43% in ward 1. Like I said, I work at H.D. Cook Elementary, and we can really just appreciate how big these gaps are and how much averages can actually mask. We teach 426 fantastic elementary school students. 52% are Latinx, 42% are English language learners, nearly all of whom are native Spanish speakers. But just 4 teachers, that's about 6% of all of our teachers, are Latinx. And that's the highest that number has been since I became a teacher at H.D. Cook 4 years ago. That's not to say that the staff at the school is doing a poor job at teaching our students. On the contrary, they represent a really fantastic group of teachers who are committed to making sure that we are serving all of our students in an equitable way. But this gap should matter to us because it matters to our students as they walk into the building every single day. As countless studies have shown, students of color perform better academically and they feel more cared for when they are taught by an adult who reflects their race and ethnicity. These benefits, there are countless benefits, but they also extend to improved academic perceptions and attitudes towards students of color and improved college-going rates. Nothing reminds me more of why this is a cause worth advocating for than when a Latinx student or parent confides in me something that is really personal to them, and it forces me to advocate on their behalf. This might be giving them information about their rights are when they're faced with ICE, or just asking me where they can access mental health services in the district. Many of the times I was just one of the few people who they felt comfortable talking to. But I'm constantly wondering how many stories our Latinx students and their families would be empowered to tell if there were more Latinx teachers to tell them too. We should care about uplifting everyone's voice in an equitable way. And from my experience as a Latinx student and a current teacher, I believe that it's really important that we really uplift our Latinx educators. A few things that we can do are investigate what the barriers are for teacher candidates to become certified in DC and remove those barriers, increase the size of current Grow Your Own programs, support the funding of visas for Spanish-speaking teachers, a cost that is often prohibitive to schools, and support the growth of bilingual and dual language programs, especially in strategic locations that will benefit our most disadvantaged Latinx populations. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Flores, and I teach at a dual language school in Columbia Heights. I teach at Powell Elementary School. I've been a first grade teacher there for 5 years, but I've been teaching as a Latinx educator for 8 years total, and I've been here in DC, which is home DMV, for 6 years. I do love teaching. It's my passion, and it is something that it would be my dream to be able to spend. I'm going to pull this a little bit closer. Sorry, excuse me. It would be my dream to be able to spend my career in education. However, I'm going to share that a huge barrier to that is my salary, and it is still the fact that in education at large, there is a small amount of Latino teachers. So in terms of other peers that I would have, other colleagues. And so to begin, I almost didn't become a teacher because I came to the field of education in a through an unconventional route. I got my licensure through the Center for Inspired Teaching, and I got my licensure through them, but they also provided, it was a dual licensure and master's program, and so that's what attracted me to them. And the master's program also came from Trinity University, but it was at a fraction of the cost of what I actually paid for my undergraduate degree. And so increasing the quantity of Latin teachers in classrooms, it matters. And we serve as the on-the-ground, in the trenches models for the boys and girls that we teach. And I teach in a community that we have a lot of Latinos, and it is a dual language school. So it's something that I see and I live every day, that they connect with me because I am like them. We are alike. We have a lot of similarities, and I can understand their families in a way that a teacher from a different culture or background would have more challenges. So growing up, my dream was never to become a teacher, and in part that had to do with my family, because my family, I'm a first generation college graduate, and if you would have asked me at 6 years old, you know, what did I want to be when I grew up, I would have been like a lawyer automatically, because all I knew at that time was that they get to talk a lot, which I think I can kind of do pretty well, and I knew that they earned a lot of money. And that was something that for my parents, for my family, it was important. And so a lack of representation of the Latino teachers is a concern, because it's one of the leading factors of why teaching never crossed my mind. Even all through high school, the only person who I knew, like from K through 12, the only person who I knew who was a teacher was my high school Spanish teacher, and she was this lady called Miss Castro. She's a grumpy Cuban abuelita, and that was it. And so there is still an issue. The fact that there's still an issue of like a lack of Latino teachers in education is a big problem. And so at my school, we are a unique school, not like her school. My whole team is all Latinas, and it's something that really makes us a force. And so being able to move forward and provide licensure and more exposure for Latina teachers would be something that would increase students having that as their dream and being able to choose that as a career, as a profession. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Samuel Cuadro, and I also came here on a J1 visa. We know that DC is a district that values equity and diversity. For these reasons, we wanted to bring to your attention the following concerns and solutions. Number one is the Latinx statistics. In order not to repeat what my colleagues have said, I'm going to mention the statistics of my school. I teach, well, I forgot to say, I'm a math teacher at Deal. This is my fourth year there, but I've been in the educational system for 15 years now. I'm a parent of two beautiful girls, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity one more time, and Empower for inviting us. The Latinx statistics in my school is just 16% of my school is Latino students. However, it is 16% over 1,500 that gives you more than 240 students that are only represented by 4 Latino teachers. Only me is the one who teaches a different subject other than Spanish. So I teach math and English to mostly Americans. That was the statistics, number one. Number two, I would like to tell you about the challenges in recruiting and retaining Latinx educators in the DCPS. Adaptation to culture and educational system. Licensure, as mentioned by Mireya, in English. But the licensure exams are in English. And the content of the readings is really biased. For example, we don't play hockey in Colombia, and that appears on readings, so it affects our understanding of it. Latinx teachers hold a temporary immigration status, mostly J1s or H1B. Our spouses, they hold an H4, and it's an issue or a challenge because they cannot work. And these temporary visas are about to come to an end. Why is it important to retain and recruit Latinx teachers? I'm gonna summarize this. The data shows that Latinx teacher representation in comparison to the amount of students. Let me go to the recommendations. But before, I would read a couple of contributions. We translate official documents such as IEP, which is Individualized Education and Accommodation Plans, translates newsletters, supports summer camps, among others. These are the recommendations because we don't have time. We believe that this CPS or the system could sponsor us with green cards as all of our visas are coming to an end. Validate Latinx postgraduate diplomas such as master's degrees, PhDs as these licensures. If that's not possible, then allow a period of 3 years for Latinx educators to acquire or to get that DC teaching licensure. Administer a test that is called PCMAS or PCMAS, which is a test in Spanish that comes from Puerto Rico, but offer it more often in the year. This test only covers what they call at Aussie the core tests, which is reading, writing, and math, basic math though. Content and pedagogy tests for licensure should be administered in Spanish. Consider experienced Latinx teachers to become the leaders of recruitment processes and mentors of the new to the system Latinx educators. And finally, consider to increase Latinx representation in education policy making. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. O'Leary.
Yes, I have two questions. The first thing, Mr. Cuadro, is that correct?
Yes.
In your testimony, you said that in number 2, many Latin, you said about the scam, about being certified. Does the DCPS know about that?
As you could see, I had to omit saying that. I have to say that I called my immigration lawyer before coming in here, and it seems like standing up for yourself in public, which is something ridiculous, will backfire on you. And then that's the reason why I didn't mention that. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring it up, but I think that DCPS needs to know about that.
I've been fighting with myself because that's exactly what I came here for, to say that. But
okay, let me drop that for right now. But I'd like to ask everyone about when you started teaching, the first year you started teaching, how were you evaluated under the regular impact system? And were the persons who evaluated you, did they have any idea what you were doing in the classroom?
Okay, I taught in Colombia for 14 years. I was a professor and a teacher. Before coming here, I was the assistant principal of elementary school. I was in charge of evaluating the teachers. We have our methodology of doing it. It wasn't like a standardized statewide system. That's my experience, at least.
But when you came here, was the person evaluating you, I know I'm over time, that's okay.
No, go ahead, please.
It was you're not the boss, he's the boss. He's got the clock. But was the person evaluating you, when you came here with all that experience, did that person understand what he or she was looking at when they were evaluating you for what keeps you your job?
I believe she did.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Jacobson.
I yield my time to my colleague.
If anyone else would like to answer that, I appreciate that, Mr. Jacobson. Just as far as the evaluation system, because, I mean, you're being evaluated by someone, and I'm speaking from experience, when I had someone evaluate me one year that had no idea, wasn't even an English person, and I was an English teacher. When you started teaching, did you feel comfortable with the impact system?
Well, it was essential practices. When I started teaching, it hadn't turned into, it was still the essential practices, and no, it was one of those things that we still had the master educators, and so when we sat down to have the debriefs, And you could get different master educators. And so with the different ones, it would sometimes after the debrief, because you get your score, I would be like, this person doesn't know, have they ever been with 21 6-year-olds? No. And so that they would not have, I guess, knowledge, because they could be from anything from K to 12. And so, no.
Yes, ma'am.
So, en español o en inglés. So, usted está haciendo la pregunta como refiriéndose a la persona que nos evaluó antes de ser contratados,
No.
o la persona que nos evalúan como maestros dentro de la clase.
You were doing the question like a person that we do the evaluation when we were hired or after we did starting working?
When you started working, the first year when you were evaluated for the impact.
Yo tuve dos experiencias diferentes. Cuando estuve en el charter school, la persona que me evaluaba no era una persona latina, no conocía sobre mi cultura, sin embargo, era una persona con mucha experiencia en educación bilingüe. Al entrar a DCPS fue un panorama diferente.
Okay, I have two experiences on that matter. First, I was working in charter school, and the person that evaluated me was not a person that was a Latinx, but on the other hand, she had a lot of experience on dual language education. So I had a good experience with her. But the thing was totally different when I got into DCPS.
Okay, thank you.
So my first year in DCPS,
It's okay.
I think we can give
Okay.
translation additional time.
Continue. Go ahead.
I would do it in English and you help me when I don't want to make him. So my first years in DCPS was very challenging regarding the evaluation, because the person who evaluates me doesn't speak Spanish, and I was teaching in Spanish. I know that was very weird. So
Thank you. That's all I needed to hear. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. That was fabulous, especially from one of our Ward 4 schools, pal, which I visit a lot.
If there are other members that want to ask comments, just raise your hand. And John Paul will
Gasoi.
call you on in his order.
Okay. First of all, thank you all so much, and thank you to the teachers of Empower Ed for bringing this very important issue to the fore. Actually, in general, our teaching force is very white and feminine, as it has been from the beginning. I think it's 75% white and female, and so this is an issue that's a national, something that needs to be addressed at the national level, but it's not going to change unless we do something very deliberate. So thank you, and thank you for the report. And I just want to say, as the Ward 1 representative, of course, this is a very important issue for me and my constituents, and I am going to bring a draft resolution to our next working group. So your testimony has been really helpful in sort of informing that, as well as the report from Empower Ed. I have a very specific question for Mr. Cuadro about the test from Puerto Rico that you were mentioning. That's a teacher test?
It is a teacher test.
And so you were saying that it would be helpful to have that given more often during the school year. Can you explain?
Because, for example, this current year, it wasn't given to the. I am already a licensed teacher. I got my licensure, but for teachers who like have a language barrier, that is you take it and it's super long. It's super challenging. It's in Spanish. So it's not provided, it's not given. It was given just once a year. And I'm just saying that if we have the contacts, I know who the person is, we could just give it more times a year. I would say 3 or 4 times, because it's important for others to prepare for that test and take it, have the opportunity to take it many more times in the year. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but my time's up, so I will maybe ask you again if I have another round. Or I can catch up with you later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Sutter?
Thank you all so much for your testimony. And Ms. Pimienta, I want to thank you especially for your comments about the value of Latino teachers and Latina teachers in schools. My first 2 teaching posts in Chicago and in Los Angeles were in Latino communities. And so I valued my colleagues who were Latino and Latina and spoke Spanish, were able to relate to our families in a way that I was not, and who helped me be welcomed in by families in a way that I would not have been able to do on my own. So I appreciate that comment. The other thing I want to say thank you for is I represent Ward 6. We have only one school that offers dual language immersion, Tyler Elementary. And I've been listening very carefully to conversations at that school. I see you smiling because Principal Brand has come to us and we adore her. But everything that you all shared about the lack of curriculum for bilingual educators in the Common Core subjects, the fact that teachers are being relied on to translate IEPs and 504 plans, the fact that we're not thinking about how are we doing intervention for students with special education needs in their native language, how are we doing that for non-native speakers who are part of dual language immersion programs but have IEPs who are going to be receiving instruction in both languages. And I'll be honest, I'm horrified, because I kind of figured that if we were offering dual language immersion programs in a public school system, that these would be expected things that would be implemented as part of that programming. And so the fact that it is not is deeply disturbing to me, and I'm eager to keep learning more about it and figure out how the state board can be involved in supporting an effort that says, if you are offering bilingual education programs, you have to offer bilingual curriculum. If you are offering bilingual education programs, you have to have bilingual intervention for students with special ed needs, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to learning more from the work of Empower Ed and the teachers that are part of this initiative. Thank you.
Mr. Parker?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. As you likely know, we've been doing a great deal of work on teacher retention, and it is my hope that our next phase of that work really delves deeply into teachers of color and how do we retain them. Interestingly enough, I looked at the stat earlier today because ASI's oversight hearing was this morning. They would actually argue that Latinx teachers are the highest retained teachers, and I want to say roughly 75%. But what I'm hearing from you all and what I know to be the case is that there is not enough teachers to begin with. So even if you're retaining 75% of a very small pool, there's still a wide gap, as you spoke to. So thanks for bringing that to the fore. I won't mention the leader or the school, but I recently had a conversation that was very sobering. It was a Latino school leader that said, Zach, the crisis at hand is that our Latinx students are struggling. We're struggling to find programs for them. And when they are in the programs, we have affluent families who send their kids to these programs, and now they're more fluent in English and or Spanish than the Latinx students. And so I say all that to say, what recommendation, because the state board oversees both graduation requirements as well as different learning standards, what recommendations might you have for the ways in which we could put more Latinx students on a path towards graduation? That's a lofty question. I know. One, I did reference your list of recommendations where it like including bilingual standards within our set of standards. But what other recommendations do you think might be helpful?
I can speak to, I'm thinking mostly of our language learners in the district and how a lot of our Latinx students are language learners. A lot are not, but many who are, I know that it is a lot harder to graduate high school if you are still an English language learner. I often worry about statistics of long-term English language learners, students who kind of never exit out of the system because they either weren't supported in the proper ways throughout their language acquisition development, or because schools were under-resourced and they maybe just didn't have the availability to have ELL teachers push in or pull out as much as they needed. The other thing I'll say, so to that point, I think we need to really look at how the district is being strategic about placing ELL teachers in schools, and what models we're using in schools to make sure that we're using research-based practices for what's going to get students to acquire language the quickest. The other thing I can think of is I grew up bilingual thanks to my parents, but a lot of my students, they struggle with managing the English in the school and the Spanish at home. And I think it's really important, maybe not so much to college-going rates, but definitely to our students' ability to assimilate in a really sort of strong way to the American culture, that they don't lose their own culture as they're gaining the American culture, and a huge part of that is language. And so to your point about dual language programs, I think it's really important that they're accessing the kids who are farthest from opportunity.
Yes.
Thank you. The representative's time has expired. Mr. O'Sullivan?
Thank you. Thank you all for your beautiful testimony, and not even that, but thank you all for being, I'm sure, great teachers, and maybe more importantly, even better role models to Latinx students, because I know, and I know you all know, the importance of having students see people who look like them in the classroom from an educator's position, and not just looking around and feeling out of place, so that they can actually feel comfortable. And thank you all for addressing some of the barriers that Latinx students face. And Mr. Motta, you talked about some of a list of suggestions you had for dealing with these issues, and I have it here, but in case you just want to read some of them out loud, because I thought there were some pretty good suggestions on how to really get more Latinx teachers.
Yeah, I'm actually missing my own packet.
There's one here.
Some of the things that I've been considering, and that thank you so much. That I've been thinking about have been, for example, advertising or partnering with local and out-of-state universities for Spanish, or those language teachers that are sought to receive placement at DC schools with appropriate applications and documentations proving that they're bilingual and teaching that they have those abilities. I was also something that is heavy on every Spanish teacher or bilingual teacher is the taxes that's often placed on them at their school, where there are Latino parents, and what I mean by that taxes is that there is more needs for translation. They're often called into rooms to help with an issue that they may not know anything about, and they have to dedicate time to that, and they become emotionally tied. There's multiple ways in which this sort of works, right? But if we acknowledge that if we're able to acknowledge that as a system, if we're able to offer a stipend for those bilingual teachers, if we're able to allow the current bilingual teachers to prove those abilities and receive a stipend, or able to somehow integrate some of those some offerings of social systems to help those that have bilingual abilities stay in the U.S. And offer that visa and worker help, I see that there would be a greater retention and more, just in general, a greater amount of teachers coming in and people wanting to work in the district and stay as bilingual teachers.
Thank you. The representative's time has expired. Ms. Williams, do you have any questions? President Wattenberg.
In the interest of time, I'm not going to ask any questions, but I want to thank you very, very much for coming. This was terrific. I know I learned a lot. I think we all learned a lot. And we're all getting lots of emails from Empower Ed, and we're going to continue to learn about this. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next panel will be Johanna Barrantes, Justin Lopez-Cardoze, Darlene Oliver, Sharon Edwards, Davon Edwards. Step there and see if I have 5.
This is the one last person.
Someone called them too. And Stefania Slabyj, thank you. If you could just pull a chair to the side, that way we can keep you all together. Sorry, our table's not long enough. Thank you so much. We can begin down here, Ms. Barrantes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for allowing me to testify tonight. My name is Johanna Barrantes, and I am the Community Outreach Strategist of the DC Language Immersion Project. DC Immersion works to increase opportunity through multilingual education. On behalf of DC Immersion, I would like to thank the board for its outspoken support for multilingual education. As an English language learner who was forced into an English-only education system that devalued my home language, my roots, and academic potential, dual language programs are very personal to me. Fast forward 2 decades, and young people today continue to be fed the narrative that their language is a detriment, not an advantage. Dual language programs are critical to English learners' future opportunity and sense of identity. Unfortunately, only 20% of the district's English learners are in dual language programs. Other traditionally underserved student populations also lack the access to these programs, in large part due to the current geographic location of the bulk of these existing dual language programs, and to the misunderstandings about who these programs are for. This matters because dual language programs lead to higher academic achievement, are highly effective and long-lasting interventions for English learners, lead to improved access to college and jobs. Recent research points to 9 out of 10 employers in the US relying on employees who speak languages other than English. This also matters because recent research conducted by DC Immersion with the University of Maryland indicates that dual language programs are racially, ethnically more diverse than non-dual language schools. Please see the demographic reports. Last but not least, dual language programs are in high demand among DC families. My school DC recently found that out of the more than 5,000 students waitlisted at a dual language school, 62% of them went unmatched at any school. An even more striking number, 1,012 applicants applied only to dual language schools. Therefore, I am here to ask SBOE to support the funding of a DLI accelerator developed by DC Immersion to increase equitable access to high-quality dual language programs. Housed under DC Immersion, the DLI accelerator leverages economies of scale and deep expertise to shift dual language specific challenges away from schools. This allows existing programs to thrive and removes barriers to new programs being planned and implemented. See the 2-pager attached. Recurring funding of $2 million per year over 5 years would allow the DLI accelerator to operate as an agile entity that would gradually be absorbed by an entity like OSSI over the next 5 years as their capacity and expertise grows. We are proud to be members of the Empower Ed Presente Coalition and signatories of the PAVE Statement of Beliefs to increase access to specialized schools programs, and see the DLI accelerator significantly bolstering both of these efforts. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up.
Good evening. My name is Sharon Edwards. I'm here to, I'm a resident of Ward 5, Brentwood area, and I'm here to give my testimony for the opposing of the W Street Bus Terminal, OSSI. I've been a homeowner in this community for 22 years. I've raised my family, my children. Now I'm raising my grandchildren in this community. We've already have 5 other companies in our community that you want to add another one. Heavy foot traffic, vehicles parking, traffic, 500 employees, 230 buses, which will bring additional fumes and noises to the community. Pre-post trips, inspections, a lot of neighbors here, my neighbors and I are retired. Some of us were dealing with illness, health illness. So if our families members would need assistance, which doctor's appointments, errands to be ran, parking and keeping in mind, rest would come in mind, quiet time would come in mind. With our few years of older, we deserve to have peace and quiet in our neighborhood. Should we be able to walk to communities, sit on our front porches, in our yards, without seeing on-site buses, hearing numerous of beepy sounds from the buses, being in reverse for parking, and there are plenty of other locations in our city that OSSI, Department of Transportation, can put their terminal with fewer complaints than our community. So enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity on behalf of the residents of Brentwood to express our concerns regarding the OSSI DGS bus terminal project. I am the ANC for this area. There will be 235 buses, 495 employees, 25 full-time staff, 1 driver, and 1 attendant per bus, which equals 470 employees to support the buses. Employees arrive as early as 3:45 a.m. 47 parking spots on site. 484 employees will park on W Street and Residential Street. They will be nearly full when they arrive at 3:45 a.m. OSSI employees will be competing with employees from Capital Paving and Department of Transportation Bridge and Maintenance, who also park on W Street, who will not be able to do so when they arrive at 5:30. OSSI will have shuttle bus services for employees, but they cannot force employees to use it. The study also only took into account 47 buses to fill 47 spots on site, but not the 495 total employees. The report stated that 230 buses would outbound at 2.5 hours or 92 buses per every 40 seconds. This is unrealistic. The buses would disembark this site in such an evenly spaced manner. The movement of buses will have a negative effect on interstates already rated D or worse. The traffic study did not take into account the effect on New York Avenue, 1 block south, or Montana Avenue, 1 block north. There will be additional pollution and exposure to cancer-causing benzene from the additional vehicles, buses, and on-site fueling station. Negative effect from exhaust, additional pollution on asthma and respiratory conditions. We have a high cancer rate in Brentwood. There have been no studies regarding the effect on air quality, and none are pending. Where is the study on noise and negative effect on residents' sleep, stress levels? It is well documented that noise is associated with high levels of blood pressure, heart disease, and disturbed sleep. It is well documented that industrial sites depress residential property values. Residents who want to sell their homes will not receive their full worth. Thank you.
Good evening to the DC State Board of Education and attendees. My name is Justin Gustavo Lopez-Cardoze. I'm the 2020 District of Columbia State Teacher of the Year, and I'm the first Latinx educator to receive this honor since its existence. I attend this evening on behalf of my institution, Capital City Public Charter School in Ward 4, representing a voice for our Latinx students, families, staff, and community supporters. I sincerely appreciate the board for holding this space for me to testify. Although I can use my time this evening to reference the insurmountable amount of data that supports the need to recruit, support, and retain Latinx educators in DC, I would like to share a story that brought me to where I am now. Quoting a current 8th grader, as a Latino, everything I represent matters. My language, my family, my skin. I need my teachers to see my value and to lift me up when others fail to acknowledge me. A year and a half ago, his somber stature and facial expressions read his silent calling for escape during one of my lessons. My instincts quickly cued the cohort to return back to their storyboards as I stood at the door and made my eye contact with him. Without hesitation, he modestly paced towards me and positioned himself directly outside of my door. Suddenly, as with all of my hallway conversations with students, Mr. Lopez-Cardoze needed to be Justin for my student. He hid behind his hoodie and said it. My uncle is getting deported. These words evoked an overwhelming shock of spinning back into 2006, rushing out of the class to seek support from my guidance counselor. I did not know what I wanted from her at the time, but I received what felt like a superficial interview, leaving me to mourn in helplessness, feeling alone and misunderstood. My uncle is getting deported. 2019, and at 13, he was trapped in my 17-year-old psyche of traumatized entropy and desperation. Proceeding empathically connecting with him by sharing my story, I centered this devastation around his orientation to the news. What's going through your mind? How can I show up for you? How can others show up for you when you enter the building? Estamos juntos. I'm not going anywhere, and you are never alone. We as a school have provided him and his family with the resources and people necessary to continuously lift them up. And the once head-to-the-ground young man walks our hallways in confidence, knowing he is loved. We as a district and country have the utmost responsibility to honor, serve, protect, and defend our Latinx students, families, and communities. Whether we teach one student of Hispanic heritage or we teach a full school of Latinx scholars, we have an obligation to learn and implement effective structures that activate every Latinx scholar to know their insurmountable worth in our world. Make no mistake that we as a multicultural coalition must learn and act together, rowing against the current with which many, including our current political climate, attempt to control. Our fight against racism, xenophobia, and ignorance will prevail amongst those who doubt our power, and we will not succumb to those who try to silence us. Our presence as students, families, teachers, school leaders, and communities is essential to the foundation of our district. Without our contributions, DC and our educational landscape cannot thrive nor prosper. Thank you for your time, and I remain eager to answer any questions that the board elicits.
Good evening. My name is Davon Edwards, also a resident of Ward 5, the Brentwood area. I'm here with my mom, and maybe I should have read hers because she wrote almost exactly what I wrote. So I'll speak on, being a former employee of OSSI, how sometimes the startup process begins as early as 2:30 in the morning. Pre-trip inspections, you may hear horns, beeping, fumes, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And like she said, 400 or 500 employees, so everyone's fighting for a parking position on W Street. And then on W Street, it's a two-way street, so you have homes on one side of the street, and they're talking about putting the OSSI school buses on the opposite side of the street. So as soon as you come out your house, you're looking right at school buses, capital paving, DDOT, all the foot traffic. You're hearing people talking 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe disrupting your sleep. That's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. My name is Stefania Slabyj. I'm also a Ward 5 resident, and I'm here to voice my opposition to the proposed bus terminal at 1601 W Street Northeast. As has already been said, the location of the proposed bus terminal is a residential neighborhood that is already highly industrialized, with the DC Department of Public Works, DDOT, and private construction companies. The proposed bus terminal with 230 buses, a fueling station, and nearly 500 employees would negatively impact the quality of life of the surrounding residents who already suffer due to traffic from heavy vehicles, air and noise pollution, and parking of non-residents on residential streets. I've been a resident in the neighborhood for over 8 years, and I'm concerned about air pollution, as I have to change on a monthly basis an HVAC filter that's meant to be changed every 3 months. It's been disappointing that DGS and OSSI staff who have attended ANC meetings have been dismissive of community concerns. One DGS staff person stated the current bus terminal is on New York Avenue, so what's the difference placing it here just a mile away? It has to go somewhere. While a representative of AMT LLC, the engineering company hired by DGS, remarked, the air quality in the area is already poor, so the bus terminal will not make it worse. Putting aside the indifference of DGS and OSSI to community concerns, the project is poorly conceived and will not succeed. The traffic impact study includes many faulty assumptions, including that 230 buses would outbound over 2.5 hours, evenly paced at every 40 seconds. The study, when looking at traffic flow through the area, only took into account the 47 employee cars to fill the spots on site, but not the nearly 500 employees that need to be based at the terminal. Given that the area is not easily reached by public transportation, particularly when employees will be reporting for work as early as 3:45 a.m., it's unrealistic to think that only 47 employees will be driving to the bus terminal. I would strongly urge the district to reconsider placing the bus terminal at this location. I would also recommend that another ward house the terminal. Currently, 3 of the 4 bus terminals of the district are in Ward 5, within a 1-mile radius. The government of the District of Columbia should stop using Ward 5 as dumping ground and revitalize its commitment to transform the area from its current industrial use. Thank you.
Members, questions? Mr. Sullivan?
Thank you all for your testimony. I don't have any questions, but I did appreciate Ms. Barrantes and Mr. Cardoze. Is that it?
Lopez or Lopez-Cardoze is fine.
Lopez-Cardoze. Thank you all for what you said about dual language schools and how important it is and some of the positive effects that it could have in our community, and then also for sharing that touching story of your student. I think that was very beautiful, and I just wanted to really reinforce that as someone who I feel that I have seen the effects of a community changing because the people in power aren't listening to the community. I feel that it's about time that people with power actually start listening to the concerns that people with real lives actually have, because these are real lives being affected. Like you said, you're waking up at 2 and 3 in the morning and seeing all of this traffic. Like, that's not something you want to see. And this is something that as civilians living in your city, in your neighborhood, that you shouldn't have to live through this. And I think that it's important that we as a city and as public officials actually do what's best for the community and not just act out of simply just with no transparency and not actually listening to the people whose lives are at stake by these decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parker?
Thank you. As the representative for Ward 5, I could totally attest to some of the frustrations that you all are speaking about, and the fact that Ward 5 is often a catch-all for many things, including this bus terminal. I will admit I didn't have as much context, but now that it is on my radar, I am deeply concerned based on some of the things that I'm reading and hearing. I did reach out to the councilman's office, and they asked that I just read the statement and it reads, "We are deeply concerned about the planning on the project and whether it is suitable for the community. We are hoping to work with the administration to resolve issues, but now all of our questions have been adequately addressed." And that's the end of that message. And so for what it's worth, I'm also willing to raise my voice and ask questions, whether that's authoring a letter, reaching out to OSSI and the like. But can you, any of the residents of Ward 5, and maybe I'll start with you, Commissioner Oliver, can you just shed light on the conversations that have already taken place? I know there are a number of email exchanges that were provided and the like, but what testimony have you heard? And in that would be helpful context for me to have.
Okay, all of the testimony that I have, testimonials I say that I have, are in opposition for this project, because it's if you can imagine the noise, the pollution, the dirt, the 495 people milling around in front of your house, looking for parking spaces, it's just not going to work.
Absolutely. And to clarify, I mean conversations you've had with either folk at OSSI or DGS and the like.
We've had a meeting with them, and it did not go well. They could not. We did put forth a couple of questions, a couple of alternative entrances and exits for the project. We have not heard back from them. I have contacted them a couple of times, not heard back.
Just to add to that, so yes, OSSI was at 2 ANC meetings back in October, and these were concerns that were raised. and they were pretty much dismissed. DGS has provided that traffic impact study, which as we've all noted, has a lot of flaws in it, and I think is really pretty superficial. The Aussie representative, in response to a lot of the concerns, his response would be that his main priority and concerns were the school children and being sure that they could attend school, and saying it in such a way that our community concerns meant that we were not in support of the school children, which was rather dismissive and unfair.
Additional questions? Dr. Gasoi.
Sorry. Thank you all for your testimony. I would just say for the folks in Ward 5 that your testimony definitely raises some very similar issues that were raised earlier, that we've heard a lot around the lack of sincere engagement and responsiveness from our agencies, and that's something that we really do want to work on. So thank you for your testimony. We're sorry. I actually have a very specific question for you, Ms. Barrantes, about how the accelerator will be housed. And so you're saying it would be housed under the DC immersion. Is that something you see that it would be housed there permanently, or is it something that would eventually be taken over by one of our agencies, or, yeah? So.
Yes. The way that we envision it is, as a 5-year, I don't want to call it pilot, but it would extend on over 5 years, and eventually we do see that being taken over by an entity like Aussie, for example, where right now they are growing in expertise and they are working on a Office of Multilingual Education, so it would be a great addition to that once it's robust and ready.
Is that something that's already being discussed with them, or is it?
No, but we look forward to it.
Okay, good to know.
Dr. Sutter?
Yes, thank you. So I also want to thank the residents of Brentwood and Ward 5 who've come to testify. As a Ward 6 resident, we have a number of things that end up in our ward as well and adjacent to our ward, and I do understand the concerns. I have one question. What is it that you hope the State Board will do on this effort? Because we don't have any control over the placement of the parking lot, so what are you coming to ask us to help with?
Listen to us. It's like we're talking to a brick wall. No one is listening to us. We don't want this project. That is the bottom line. It is disruptive. It is going to be the traffic. I can't. The thought of that much traffic in our little area is incredible. It's 450 employees. Where are they going to park? There is nowhere to park. There are very few parking spaces as it is. Please listen to us.
Thank you for that.
If I could also just add that I think that there needs, if there needs to be more analysis and more thorough analysis, because quite honestly, it is not going to succeed. That those buses are not going to be reaching the children when they need to be, based on the traffic flow and the impact it's going to have on New York Avenue, which, as we all know, is a major thoroughfare in our city, and Montana Avenue. So it's not the best place, even if you're looking at it specifically from Aussie's point of view. They're not going to have an easy time operating from that location.
Thank you. With my last 18 seconds, thank you, Mr. Lopez-Cardoze, for your passionate testimony. I really appreciate that. And then Ms. Barrantes, I wanted to say, I'm very interested in the DLI Accelerator. There is a program, an organization in DC called the DC Special Ed Co-op that seeks to be an assistive organization for special education, specifically for charter schools, aiming to accomplish a lot of the same kind of things you've talked about here. So one, I'd encourage you to reach out to them just to understand how they started, which was with a grant from Aussie, and how they've evolved into an independent nonprofit. They went sort of that route, but I'd also be very happy to talk with you a little bit about my experience working with cooperatives in other states that do the work around special ed, because I think something like this could be incredibly powerful, and I love that it's across sectors. Thank you very much.
President Wattenberg? Oh, sorry, Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam President. Full disclosure, DC Language Immersion Project has given me an award in the past, and I'm very proud of that fact. So I just want to make sure everyone knows I am biased. At any rate, could you tell the public a little bit about the importance of dual language immersion and the success that the students who have that opportunity see later in life?
So I think one of the closest examples I can come up with is we right now hold a, can you hear me? A small cohort of what we like to call multilingual ambassadors. And these are English language learners from Roosevelt dual language high school. And they are kids who, just like many of the Latinx teachers have mentioned, have so many unique struggles, right, when they arrive. And it has been so life-changing and opportunity boosting for them to be able to learn both in English and in Spanish, and to feel represented and to have courses and a staff and a system that supports their unique challenges. And these kids come once a week, and they do, not only are they learning more about what dual language is and how it's, or the current state of it here in DC, but they're, I think, also gaining a lot of, or maybe regaining value and understanding that there's a lot out there for them, not just job-wise, but college, right, and all the other access to opportunity which leads to access of information that they didn't have prior, right? So those are one of the things that we are so excited to be a part of this year. But I come from the opposite side. I grew up with an English only, and just like one of the teachers that mentioned, I am bilingual because my parents were really adamant and were strong advocates in the house to stay. But it was a huge struggle to not feel represented at my school, to not see any authentic material, anyone who spoke my language, or to be encouraged. They weren't encouraging me to let go of my language, but by not having it around, they're basically saying that the priority was English. So I think there's a huge opportunity here to have these 20% of English learners, have that same opportunity that the multilingual ambassadors have, to feel represented, to have opportunity to learn in both languages, and then whatever the future holds. And DC Immersion does feel like this is really a matter of capacity, even if all the English language learners were in dual language programs, there still wouldn't be enough dual language programs for these English language learners. So it is a matter of access, that we just don't have enough of these programs.
Thank you, my time has expired. I appreciate it.
Hi, so first of all, to all of you from Ward 5, I want to say I am very sympathetic to the lack of responsiveness that you have experienced. We heard about it earlier today with regard to some other issues as well. What I've talked to our executive director about is that we will take your testimony and we will send it over there. That is not to say they will do something with it, but it's what we can do to sort of have one more thing going over there, asking them to take a look at it. So thank you for taking your time to come here, and good luck trying to make something happen. To Mr. Lopez-Cardoze, thank you for joining us again. Very nice to see you. And to Ms. Barrantes, I have a question which you may also add on to, but I'm just interested in what the dual language accelerator is, literally. What is it? So it's this, and then it's going to go to Aussie. What is it?
So a lot of the educators that we've heard from tonight had a lot of very legit concerns, and even Representative Sutter talking about the things that Tyler needs or that community needs. The curriculum, the assessment, the HR support, those are all very unique challenges for schools, but dual language schools have very unique challenges under those topics, and the accelerator would help with those things, making sure that there are assessment in the language that kids need, right? Or that the curriculums that we are getting for these schools are appropriate, inclusive, that they're fit for the community that they're being housed in. And Also that the dual language educators are being properly supported. So I can keep going down that list.
No, and so with this initial, I know you talk about eventually it would move over to Aussie, but is it also initially housed in Aussie? Or
No, we are envisioning this under DC immersion as a
okay, thank you very much. So it's a full package of supportive services to these schools.
Yes.
Got it. I think it sounds like a very interesting way to go. All right. Thank you very much. And with that, oh no, I'm over. Okay, that's the end of our public comment for this evening. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
All right. We are now going to turn to a budget priorities discussion. The district's budget process and how exactly appropriated dollars get distributed to individual schools is challenging to fully understand, and of course it has great consequences. I have been an elected official now for 5 years, and it is still fuzzy for me. There are opportunities for the public to engage in the budget process through school-level budget meetings, the mayor's budget town halls, and through the council's hearing process, and we encourage you to take advantage of all of those processes and vehicles. As I noted earlier, the State Board does not itself have authority or oversight over the school budgets, but we represent the students who attend those schools and their families. We are very eager to have our own clear understanding of the budget as it relates to these families and schools so that we can be the advocates that we want to be and that our constituents want us to be. And when we want you who are watching us and following this to understand what is at issue in this budget. Tonight's discussion is designed to assist all of us in that process. Our 5 witnesses are Mary Filardo from the Coalition for DC Public Schools and Communities, Letisha Vinson, Ward 7 parent leader from Parent Amplifying Voices in Education, PAVE, Chelsea Coffin, director of the Education Policy Initiative at the DC Policy Center, Qubilah Huddleston, policy analyst at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, and Mary Levy, education budget analyst. So I'm going to go in order. So Mary Filardo.
Good evening. Mary Filardo, and I'm Executive Director of the 21st Century School Fund, and here as a member of the C4DC Coalition. For those of you who may or may not know what the C4DC Coalition is, it's a coalition of the volunteer, ward-based civic organizations of parents and community, as well as a set of sort of those of us more technical research and advocacy groups, the 21st Century School Fund, the Senior High Alliance of Parents, Principals, and Educators, Empower Ed is a member, DC Fiscal Policy Institute. There are a number from the budget, governance, and education side, and we are particularly focused on the issues of DCPS. And DCPS as the system of right, our municipal system that provides schools of right for our kids, and that has really these special responsibilities in the city as it relates to our kids. As a city system, the equity across all of the schools and all of the sites is really important. The access across the city is actually really critical as well. And then the other sort of really fundamental responsibility is that DCPS accepts and serves any, student at any time during the school year. And so, for example, in the 18-19 school year, DC Public Schools had to accept about 4,000 more kids. They're mostly from out of state. Sometimes people think, oh, they're all from the charters. They're not. They're mostly actually from out of the District of Columbia. They might be from private schools. Some will be from charter schools, but mostly they're coming in, moving into the city at different points during the year. But that was 4,000 more kids after the October count that they had to serve. So these responsibilities as the municipal system have placed the DC Public Schools in a particular, with particular pressures. And so what I provided to you, and I have a few copies if people who are still left want to take them. I'm happy to just set them on a chair behind us maybe, or put them over there. What I thought might be useful is, one, I want you to understand what the position of C4DC is as we're looking at this budget, but part of what we were able to do was actually download and export the whole $806 million that is being allocated to the local schools in the budget. And we're starting to try to get our heads around what's happening. Individual schools are doing it at a school community level, but C4DC is looking at the district level. And so part of what you have here is this initial school budget allocations by category and the list of all of the various items. And then on the back is the pie chart of actually how the dollars are being spent at the local school. And one of the concerns that has been raised and that we are trying to address in essentially in the pie chart is the need actually for more general ed teaching positions. That there's the class sizes we are hearing and are seeing as really too high for our populations. And that part of what happens as their requirements, whether it's to have more AP or more electives, that the basic education classes like your geometry for 10th grade or your 9th grade English, they are ending up very large class sizes. And so there's a recommendation to increase the general ed teachers in DCPS, and this would be general ed for EL as well as general ed, would be 100 teachers. The other thing that we're seeing is that we are still not staffing our schools with full-time librarians and full-time related arts teachers. And we think these are particularly strong equity issues because, again, what's happening with DCPS is where they have smaller schools, which they have to have because they have to be able to provide access to public schools wherever they are. They do not have these positions filled, and we think these are really standard positions that ought to be in any system. Additionally, what we're seeing is that middle school counselors, there are very few and far between, almost 300 or more per middle school kid. And if you're going to have a path to success in high school, you really need to have a plan in middle school. The other thing that we're seeing is that the aftercare costs, some of them are being borne by the local school, not carried by the community, the 21st Century Community Centers program. And so these are actually competing with their academic dollars. And so those schools are paying for aftercare, which is very important, and not able to do some of those related arts or other teachers. Additionally, there's a wait list in the schools that already offer the aftercare of 1,700 kids, and that needs to be taken care of. And finally, the area very near and dear to my own heart is DGS is entirely underfunded for the maintenance of our school buildings. And those of us who have any age on us, remember what they were like, and that was a function not only of the age of the schools, but of the lack of maintenance. And we are going to accelerate the decline if we do not fully fund DGS and hold them accountable for the proper maintenance of our school buildings. So that's the $25 million, which only gets us part of the way to their using good standards. So that, I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of some of the key areas that we've been looking at. And you had one other piece, which is, sorry folks, is the capital program. And what this is the list of all of the schools, the 30-some schools that are nowhere in the capital budget right now and have only had phase one modernization. So are really not, these are the schools in the poorest conditions. So thank you.
Yes.
I didn't know if you wanted me to start over with the time. So as earlier stated, I'm Letisha Vinson. I am a board member of PAVE, which is Parents Amplifying Voices in Education. I also am on the KIP DC Parent Advisory Board, as well as my kids' school board. I'm very engaged. I'm not from DC, and so I have a very different expectation for education. I'm really happy to piggyback off of Ms. Mary here, because a lot of what she's saying is a part of our statements of beliefs, which you all have before you. And it is also an integral improvement necessary for DC education as a whole. One of the things that we have done now for the second year is mental health supports. We have recognized that having surveyed over 3,000 DC parents and caregivers, we have a vision that includes all children feeling safe, mental health wellness, having the decrease in stigma, understanding what trauma is and how we can train our staff, our community on trauma-informed training, as well as the communities as essential partners, parents as partners, and advocate having our children have a social and emotional background whereby they can express themselves and articulate their needs and concerns while in school. We know that there's a huge problem with mental health across the nation, but in DC, 1 in 5 children have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. Almost half of them have had a trauma in their life, which is an adverse childhood experience. And if unaddressed, there could be a number of coinciding factors that a lot of our budgeting dollars are going to, like pregnancies and truancies and suspensions and handling behaviors and so forth, which could be eliminated with education and preventative measures. So what we have done for the second year is asked for there to be trained professionals in the schools and in the communities, partnering with DBH and other community organizations and partners, whereby they can provide resources and supports, not to just the students while they're in school, but outside of school during summer and out of school time. In addition to that, having some standard practices, doing analysis, doing evidence-based social emotional learning programs that will ensure that the safety and well-being of the whole child and not just what's happening at home stays at home and what happens at school stays at home, and having that congruency. One of the ways that this can be achieved is by increasing the UPSFF, which has been approved for the 4%, which was our recommendation for the first fiscal year. However, it does not incorporate or include the increases of costs for staff. So it really is like a 6% increase that we need from our 2013 analysis that stated that we were way behind when it comes to this uniform per student funding formula. And then for the next fiscal year, an additional 3% to get us caught up to where we need to be so that we can use these fundings to help do some of the things that we need to do in the schools to make sure that they are safe. Staff are trained, the parents are trained or are informed and maybe are getting services as well. And we're partnering with our communities, having evidence-based training and practices implemented throughout the city for all students and not just those in need, but also to understand and provide a safe environment for them. The other initiative that we focused on is the specialized school programs, which she touched on also. And the reason why this is really important, because we talk about retention for teachers, we talk about the whole child, we talk about dual languages in the previous sessions. All of those things determine outcomes for the students in every level. And especially when it comes to outcomes of high school and graduates and so forth. And so what we've learned is that although 45% of the students that live in DC live east of the river, most of the resources are west of the river. And so there's a huge disparity with resources and access. Some people don't even know what half of these programs are. Some of them don't even exist, or there may be one in DC in total. And coming from Boston, Massachusetts, from a college prep school where you had to apply and all those other things, having classical languages and understanding dissertations and why those things are important, having science classes and languages and arts and all those different things change the perspective of an individual. Even having to travel, my first time in DC was to go to the Holocaust Museum for our Facing History class. A lot of students don't have those type of opportunities, and the schools don't have the necessary fundings to do that. So finding some alternative way to ensure that the child is experiencing what they need to know to make them a well-rounded individual, but also to ensure that they have confidence that they're building, ensure that they have access to college credits There are college early access and dual enrollment programs that exist that could be potentially implemented in some of the schools that we already have, not necessarily requiring additional school buildings, but the curriculum that goes across and that also is transcending across your grade levels. So if you start in pre-K with college prep, as KIPP does, you go all the way through college, and then they even follow you outside of school. Not that I'm advocating just for KIPP, but just the idea or the perspective that the child does need that nurturing and that idea of what it feels like or looks like as they go, and they also need the environment to do so. And those well-rounded programs allow them to do that, whether that's in the arts, whether that's in music. It even shows with dual language learners that when you incorporate arts and theater and other forms of learning, they're actually able to do better in the classroom because they build confidence and they are able to express themselves in other ways. Even for my children who are stellar students, they don't particularly love to learn, but if you give them the right book or put them in the right setting or give them the right subject matter, they will read it all day long and you can't pull it from them. So I do understand and appreciate the arts, the languages, and having had that experience firsthand, I know how imperative and impactful it can be for our children's future.
Thank you. Ms. Coffin?
Hi, good evening, members of the State Board of Education. My name is Chelsea Coffin. I'm the Director of the Education Policy Initiative at the DC Policy Center, an independent think tank focused on advancing policies for a vibrant economy in DC. I'm here to share findings from our recent reports, especially the State of DC Schools 2018-19, that may inform education budget discussions. I'll focus my testimony on 4 critical issues highlighted by our analyses: public school choice, longstanding gaps, diversity in schools, and difficulty addressing longstanding issues. First, DC has a high degree of public school choice. Among pre-kindergarten to grade 12 students, 71% attend a school other than their in-boundary school. Where there is a strong preference for in-boundary schools, schools tend to have a lower share of at-risk students. Among the 16 schools where at-risk students make up 10% or less of enrollment, the average boundary participation rate is 80% compared to 29% across the city. This high degree of choice results in long waitlists for some schools and long travel times for some students. Waitlists tend to be longer at schools with higher star ratings. Schools with a rating of 5 have, on average, 214 students on their waitlist for their entry grades, compared to 10 students with a rating at schools with a rating of 1. While most students remain in their own ward to attend school, 40% of them travel to a different ward. This share is highest, or above 50%, in wards 1, 5, and 7. High school students in wards 7 and 8 travel the farthest to school at 3.3 miles, compared to 1.4 miles for all students. Second, learning outcomes in DC are on the rise but remain low, especially for certain student groups. Citywide, learning outcomes have improved by 12 percentage points in English language arts and 9 percentage points in math since 2014-15. Even with this progress, learning outcomes are low. Only 37% of students met or exceeded expectations in LEA, and 31% met or exceeded expectations in math in the most recent year. Schools face the challenge of closing long-standing achievement gaps. Achievement gaps of at least 48 percentage points persist between the highest scoring students and 5 other main subgroups. These gaps are especially large for students with disabilities and at-risk students. Achievement gaps are generally narrowing in ELA, with Latino students making the largest progress, but gaps are widening in math. Third, some schools are extremely racially and ethnically segregated. 102 out of 220 pre-K to grade 12 schools, at least 90% of students are Black, compared to a student population that is 67% Black. And most of these schools are in wards 7 and 8, which have the lowest shares of 4- and 5-star schools. At-risk students are more evenly distributed, with many schools falling within 50 to 70% of students who are at risk, compared to 45% of all students. However, 19 schools have a very low percentage of 10% or less students who are at risk. Fourth, progress has been elusive in the areas of chronic absenteeism, suspension rates, and graduation rates. Citywide, 29% of students were chronically absent in the most recent year, missing 10% or more of the school year, and this figure stayed mostly flat over the last 2 years. Chronic absenteeism is especially high, around 43.5% for at-risk students, and this rate increased by almost 1 percentage point over the last year. In addition, suspension rates remained at 6.6% in 2018-19, despite the first year of implementation of the Fair Access to School Act. At-risk and Black students are suspended at 9 times the rate of white students, and students with disabilities are suspended at twice the rate of the city average. In-school suspension rates actually increased by 1 percentage point over the last year, or maybe more schools are reporting these instances with the new legislation. Finally, graduation rates have declined since reaching a high in 2016-17, and just over half of high school graduates continue to post-secondary within 6 months. And the city doesn't consistently track how many complete post-secondary, although it has a target of 37%. In closing, DC schools have made a lot of progress, but the work is far from complete. The DC Policy Center is taking deep dives into a series of topics over the next year, including chronic absenteeism, mental health supports in schools, priority for at-risk students in the common lottery, the gap between high school and college or career, the teacher pipeline, and exit from DC's traditional public and public charter schools. We look forward to continued information sharing and collaboration with SBOE and other education stakeholders.
Good evening. My name is Qubilah Huddleston, and I'm a policy analyst at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this evening on the ways district leaders can put the public education budget on a path to adequacy and equity. Over the last several weeks, I have testified before the Committee on Education of the DC Council on the importance of funding DC public schools and public charters adequately. I have also testified about the need for policymakers to ensure that children facing the largest opportunity gaps have the resources they need to thrive in the classroom and beyond. I will re-emphasize these points in my testimony today. As you all know, the mayor recently announced her plan to increase the uniform per student funding formula for fiscal year 2021 by 4%, one of the largest increases in recent years. DCFPI applauds the mayor for this strong investment, yet this increase will not be enough to keep up with inflation and adequately fund our schools. We estimate that a 6% increase in the UPSFF would put the district on a path to closing the adequacy gap within 2 years. It's really important to know that since the adequacy study, the district has never funded the public education budget at the level recommended in the study. The consequences of an inadequate budget are clear. The district has shortchanged our schools of hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 7 years, often forcing school leaders to choose between funding the basics for all students or providing extra resources to support students who face challenges such as poverty or homelessness, many of whom the district considers at risk. Policymakers should not be forcing school leaders to make these types of tough decisions. Inequities in resources and the resulting racial and income disparities in student outcomes are unacceptable, and they do not have to be our city's reality. In addition to fully funding the public education budget, policymakers should increase the at-risk UPSFF weight to the level recommended in the 2013 adequacy study, and should acknowledge that schools with large percentages of at-risk students need additional support. Currently, the district provides an additional $2,400 per at-risk student in the DC's public education budget, but that is not enough. In 2013, school finance experts recommended that policymakers set the at-risk weight at 0.37, which would amount to $4,200 to $4,300 per at-risk student in fiscal year 2021, depending on the approved UPSFF base. Increasing the at-risk weight is a necessary immediate step that district leaders should take, but doing so is only half the battle to promoting equity in our public schools. I do also want to call attention to the fact that the DME is currently studying the at-risk weight, so it's looking at both the adequacy of the weight. Right now it's binary, so you're either at risk or you're not, but there's 5 different categories, 4 or 5 different categories, so it's really looking at, you know, if you're a student who is experiencing homelessness and your family is eligible for TANF, how does that impact you relative to maybe being overage in high school? So that's one aspect of the study. Another aspect is they're looking at the idea that perhaps when a school reaches a certain percentage of at-risk students, that may trigger a sort of certain effects that require additional resources, and that relates to the to the bill put forth by Councilmember Trayon White, the critical risk rate. It's a lot of R's. That bill that there's a hearing on March 10th. And DCFPI is really looking forward to the DME's finding, and we're also looking forward to working more with Councilman White's office and other partners who are interested in the spirit of his bill. And then lastly, I just want to talk about the fact that the district should be expanding out-of-school time programs. Student success in school and life is about what they experience outside of the classroom as much as it is about what they do in the classroom. This budget season, policymakers should invest $25 million in OST programming. That includes $19 million for Learn 24's Office of Youth Grants and Opportunities, which would be a $5.1 million increase over the current funding level, and $5.9 million for programs funded through the Department of Parks and Rec. In recent years, the district has made historic investments in OST programs. However, further increases are needed to enable low-income students and other students who need support to have access to the same enriching OST programs as their more well-off peers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Is this on?
Yes.
All right. I'm Mary Levy. By trade, I'm a lawyer with experience in education finance. My children went through DC public schools long ago, and I've been closely involved with the Uniform per Student funding formula and its ongoing study. What we know about the budget for next year right now is that the mayor says she will increase the base per student amount by 4%. We need to know the enrollment figures on which that's based, and we need to know if the weights will change before we know much more. But as Mrs. Filardo testified, we do know what's in the DCPS local school budgets and have been studying them closely. I would say that there are two major areas that I think need priority. The first one is just stability for our schools. In recent years, parents and community have experienced ups and downs in their school budgets. Some of them lose staff every year. For DCPS, this is happening again next year, as some parents report that even if their enrollment is stable or going up, they are going to lose staff. My analysis of DCPS budget shows that almost all of the total increase for next year is consumed by enrollment increase. 45.6 million out of 47.5 million. Much of that is for increases in special education and English language learner staff. This leaves almost nothing to cover a 2.5% increase in the cost of higher staff salaries and benefits. That's a total of 16.3 million. And on the back of my testimony, you'll see a table where I lay it all out. On a per pupil basis, which is just another way of looking at it, the increase is $28.89 per pupil. They need $308 a pupil just to cover increased staff costs. Second major area where we really need priority is more support for at-risk students. I have been looking at the ability of DCPS to cover both their basic core program and keeping at-risk money targeted at at-risk students instead of siphoning it off to support the basic program. There is not enough money to do that in the budget. I have also looked at the adequacy study and at 4 of our 5 surrounding school systems to see, well, how does our basic program compare? And the answer is that our basic program is less than what the adequacy study calls for, and it is either comparable to or less than what is done in the suburbs just for students without any special needs. So it is not overly generous. I don't see cutting it back. It is unquestionable that we need more intensive services for at-risk students. I think you're familiar with what the test scores say, but I wanted to get them in the record, so I put in the latest from NAEP, and I put in a graph on Park that just shows stagnation in the scores of low-income students and huge huge achievement gaps. I would like to point out that insufficiency of resources for at-risk students is exacerbated by staff instability, because as the percentage of at-risk students in schools rises, so does the teacher turnover and the principal turnover rate. And I think we need to give our teachers and principals the tools to do the job. You're studying this. You probably know more already than any of the rest of us about causes and remedies, but I would suggest that one remedy is better funding of the basic and at-risk programs, because what research suggests is that it's reciprocal, that teachers are more likely to stay if they are seeing success with their students. It goes two ways. Finally, in terms of the specific things that I think we need to look at, I hear a lot of support for much more in the way of mental health services, richer curriculum for everybody, and it's the low-income students who tend not to get it, smaller student-staff ratios, especially in class size counseling and library services and technology support, and in-school alternatives to suspension, because suspension is almost forbidden, and yet schools have no money to handle it otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Gasoi.
Thank you. Thank you all for staying. I am going to ask questions and then leave after I hear your responses, because I have a babysitter to relieve. But actually, I just wanted to start with you, Mary Filardo. Again, a really specific question about the middle school counselors. Do you have any insight into why middle schools in particular are having that issue?
Well, middle schools tend to be funded the least generously of any of the age groups. So they would have the hardest time getting their class size, their related arts, any of the other kinds of electives that they need. And what it looks like is that they are then not funding the counselors, because they're just basically, particularly at the middle schools, there's just not enough money in the middle schools to do an appropriate education.
So it's indicative of sort of the larger problem of
a larger problem, yeah.
And why that? Why are middle schools in particular underfunded?
You know, these are kind of our lost ages, you know, for the middle schools. I think there's in the weights and in the programming, I think there's a lack of appreciation for some of the special needs of that age group, and then the resources haven't followed them. I mean, we've got our early childhood, there's a lot of focus on high schools, but there's some very famous comments made about, particularly DCPS, on middle schools that, well, we don't do those very well, somebody else can do those. And I think that we don't actually have a real education plan for, you can hear it, for ELL, you can hear we don't have an education plan for alternative education. We actually don't have a really solid middle school education plan either.
Okay, and then really quickly, in general, why are we underfunding our schools? I mean, really, where is it a matter of not having enough money? No. So I have heard the excuse that it would have to come from somewhere else, but is that, in your opinions, anyone can answer this, true, or do we have the money somewhere, and where should we be asking? Like, is there somewhere we could ask for it to come from in particular?
Well, given the surplus, if we use the smart revenue decisions like we did in the last year that scaled the qualified high technology companies tax incentive, it generated more funds, which actually contribute to the mental health supports boost last year. Things like that, being creative, we can do it. I mean, we had a huge surplus before we had the shutdown. And I think if it's a priority, we'll use it in that regard. But I think there's also a branch of accountability and follow through to ensure that those funds are spent the way that they're supposed to. As I said before, we did budget transparency last year as well, because even if funding is allocated, whether it's at risk or otherwise, they're using it for other purposes, or there isn't a lot of accountability to ensure the services are being provided as stated.
I think another thing that's contributing is that the city doesn't prepare a current services budget for the public education system. So that in effect lowers the bar, right? It doesn't really, like when the CFO puts out the CSFL, public education, there are no numbers there. And so what that means then is that the starting point of the mayor's budget doesn't actually reflect the cost to keep up, just to keep up, right? Just to keep up with growing enrollment, inflation, employment costs, like it doesn't do that. In DCFPI, I wrote a paper on that. You can read more about it. But that is a big problem because, like I said, it just lowers the bar and makes it appear as though there's not as much funding needed when there, in fact, is.
That is really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to go. Bye.
Dr. Sutter?
Yeah. Thank you all. So I feel deeply immersed in budget conversations now. I spent last night at the Ward 6 Public School Parent Organization talking with Dr. Maestera from DCPS about the budget. I spent the morning actually sitting with Chelsea and Qubilah talking about budget asks at the UNCF Education Roundtable. So thank you all for continuing this trend of my head being fully immersed in budgeting. One question I have is sort of jointly across a couple of folks here, and it has to do with the changing demographics of the city, how that's playing out in different schools, and what that means for some of the opportunities we have to think about how we integrate our schools. So Chelsea made the point about school choice and about how students are moving in different places, and also about 19 schools with less than 10% at-risk students. Several of those are in Ward 6, where I represent. The same thing I'm noticing in Ward 6 is that a number of elementary schools have lost their community eligibility status under Title I. That means they're also losing at-risk funding. And so they're seeing an actual loss of spending power, but rightfully so, because their school is now serving students with less needs. So how do we acknowledge this is happening and think differently about who we school and how we school them and where we school them to think differently about budgeting? You know, small question in 43 seconds.
So in a couple of years, there's the student boundary issue is to come forward again. And really, it shouldn't come forward as a boundary issue. It should, I'm going to sound like a broken record. If this city does not take seriously doing any real education planning, any vision about how we want public education to live in this city, we are just going to keep sort of, I don't know, bumbling. And I would argue, as one who, and Mary Levy also, there's no way that 20 years ago people thought that we would have spent $5 billion modernizing our schools. And the reason we did is because there was a public plan, a public vision. It didn't exist among the politicians, frankly. It didn't exist among the agencies. It was really a bottom-up sense that we should have modern public school buildings and good grounds for our public schools. And it survived all kinds of chaos in the city, whether it was, you know, from mayoral control before to after, to control board to after. It lived on, but it was because there were written documents that had been vetted. And the thing that always strikes me when I listen to people testifying, the common sense, the knowledge from a collective process and a collective vision is incredible. And that is what we were able to do. Now, we've lost it to some extent, and this is partly why on the school modernizations and on the school access and where the buses are and all this stuff, this should be part of a master plan. Same as the boundaries and looking at integration is a part of that conversation. So So, you know, and I think this is where the state board has a really important responsibility. You all could be the voice and the push for the planning that really should be a part of what defines us sort of through administrations and through time. But it just isn't there.
My time has expired, but I'm eager to talk more with all of you in the weeks to come.
Mr. Parker?
Thank you all for being here. Likewise, it's budget time, so a lot of these conversations are happening. When the mayor announced the 4% increase, it was interesting, and maybe I'm characterizing this wrong. It seemed like a lot of charter advocates were like, great, I'm excited. And I didn't really hear the same from DCPS advocates. In my thinking, it's probably because the money may not trickle down the same way or meet students in the classrooms in the same way, given our central office and DCPS. And so that begs the question around staffing models. And so if anyone want to take on, like, how do we ensure that the money that's being invested in our schools actually meet more of our DCPS students? I will say, I have heard the counter argument, we invest a lot of money in our schools and we're not sure that we're getting a return on our investment. So I would throw that out as one question, and then I'll throw out as another around prioritization. So if I'm talking to my council member that, let's say, is not on the ed committee or is not super invested in education issues, what is the ask that we should prioritize? I'll just leave it at that.
So I'm here as part of CFER DC, and I would argue that part of why 4% on the part of some of the charters seemed good is because the charter cash balance is pretty high, hundreds of millions of dollars in the cash balance funds of the charter schools. So there's a little flexibility there. The cash balance on DCPS starts at the beginning of the year at 0. So 4% is really not enough for DCPS, and it's not enough for our city system of right because of the other responsibilities. So I would argue that if you were going to prioritize, you would prioritize to direct the funds to DCPS in order to invest and grow your neighborhood school system.
So if I could play devil's advocate, so do we just keep spending more and more money? Or at what
Yes.
point do we say the
Until
money?
you have it equitable, until you have equity, until you are providing the kinds of programs in all of your neighborhood schools, until you have modernized the schools in 7 and 8 at the same level that you've modernized them in 3
I'm
and 4.
totally with you on that. But in terms of the staffing model, the comprehensive staffing model, is that the issue? That money is not necessarily going to the classrooms where students are sitting, because we have to kind of divvy it up across the board. And I'm bastardizing the staffing model that we have, but it was a genuine question because I've heard that tossed around, and I've heard some people say, yes, we need to change it. And I know I'm over time. And so in the wee hours of the night, if we could just entertain the answer to this question, that would be great.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't
Can
have
I just say one thing? I think we'll go first. Everybody will have a second round, so if you want to use your second round now, if that's smoother. 2 more minutes.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I don't have a specific answer to that, but what I do know, DCPS is currently exploring the CSM, their comprehensive staffing model, and they are looking at, like, how do we ensure that all schools, particularly our schools with enrollment declines, that they're going to still be able to provide their children quality educational services. But I want to go back to one of your earlier points. I don't think that any of us, and I may be speaking too much, but I don't think any of us think that we can just throw money at a problem and then that's going to solve other problems.
That's not my thinking. I've literally heard someone say that. Mary Levy shook her head, so I guess she's heard that too.
But and so I did in my testimony state that at least from the adequacy study, which is our most rigorous methodology we have of what it costs to fully educate children in DC, we haven't ever funded it at that level. So I think that's an important goal for us, and I think that's something that we can do over the next 2 years, and that should be a priority. And if the budget overall is underfunded, DCPS, they are using at-risk funds to plug holes, and I just think that if we get the budget fully funded, that wouldn't be as much of a problem.
Okay, and my last 45 seconds. So prioritization. So you hear many people talking about mental health supports, totally on board there. Birth to 3, totally on board. We need to raise the UPSFF, totally on board there. I know it's hard to pick and choose, but like any ideas around how we might approach prioritization?
You would obviously go with the biggest issue first, the one that you would have the biggest bang for your buck, so the biggest return on investment. And for that, PAVE has, with having surveyed thousands of parents across DC, mental health cross all borders, all wards, and that's something that is at the core of the classroom. So if you have children acting out in the classroom, that's obviously going to affect everyone in the classroom. If you have children that are having issues at home and aren't participating, again, that's taken from the teacher's time. And some classrooms don't have more than one teacher to deal with that, which impacts the overall outcomes for all students. When you think about mental health, it transcends across all parts of education. And so for me, that would be a core, because then it kind of helps prevent some of the other issues that arise. And it helps deal with some of the at risk as well, and some of the domino effects of lack of funding.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan?
I don't have any questions, but I really enjoyed your insight because everything that you guys said in terms of like problems that we face as students and things that aren't necessarily tackled in budgets, I think are correct. Is it Filardo? Filardo. You had a point about like libraries, specifically school libraries. I haven't had one since elementary school, and I missed them, and I actually forgot about them until last weekend when I was at another school. And it's just something that matters a lot to me, whether it's investing in the mental health of students or just addressing racial inequities. These are things that are really important. I really enjoyed your testimony because all of it rung true.
Thank you. Ms. Williams?
I just have a quick question because I've been in budget for a long time, been married for years. The current state of the DC government budget was impacted by funds used by our current president for his exhibitions, et cetera. Has that money come back to us, or what's the impact if it doesn't come back to us?
Unfortunately, we can't tell very much about the federal funds because the practice of the DC government, the CFO really, has been that federal funds have to be budgeted based on the president's budget. Well, the Congress doesn't enact the president's budget. And we have so little transparency that if you look at the approved budget for a past year, and then you look at the revised budget, there is a swing of millions and millions of dollars, and it comes from the federal government. It just arrives. We don't know what it's being spent on. Okay. It's to me a serious deficiency in the budget. I don't think we have lost much. We are scheduled to get a little less next year in Title I funds. And I don't know of anything else that's going missing that is spent in the schools. But of course, a lot of the budget for federal funds is not spent in the schools. It's spent in central offices. It may fund services that are delivered in the schools, like some of the special education services. You know, the IDEA funds do not show up in local school budgets. They're in central accounts that fund services to students. But as I said, I don't believe we've lost much.
Thank you. That answer one. All right, thank you.
President Wattenberg?
So I have a whole list of questions here, and I don't know how else to do it other than I'll just start at the top and see how far I go. So my first one is for Mary Filardo. I want to go where you started, which is the issue of DCPS's mid-year entries. And it's my understanding that there is some part of some formula that accounts for some of that. And could you just straighten us out about what DCPS does get for that and what is the gap that is left from that?
Well, of course, it's not entirely clear.
Shocking.
Shocking.
Okay.
What happens is there's a projected enrollment, which DCPS is funded on, and there is somehow a deputy mayor adjustment to that enrollment, which is supposed to account for some of that change. It's not clear how much that is.
Oh, okay.
Could be in the hundreds, but it doesn't appear to be this year in the thousands. And our recommendation, frankly, is that it should be about 1,800. It should be adjusted for 1,800.
1,800
more students.
And then what?
From the projection.
So what does, okay, it's minus 1,800 students based on your calculation, but what, for the students that do get funded, what's the funding level and where does that go? Do you see what I mean?
What do you mean, the funding?
So in other words, so you're saying that the deputy mayor does make an adjustment that leads to some amount of money.
Right, and we think
extra
that's
money.
already in the, we think that's already in the budget to the schools and or to how, whatever they have in their central office allocations now, which of course we haven't seen. All we've seen is the local budget initial allocations. So we think that that adjustment is already in that $806 million to the local schools.
And we don't know what extra amount it was.
We don't know what extra
That's
amount.
totally non-transparent.
At this point, I think it will become transparent, but it is not transparent.
Become this year even, so there'll be some number.
Yeah.
Because one thing that does strike me is we talk about it, and there's very particular costs, and it's more, some schools more than other schools. Is there any effort to try to make that match, or do we even know? I mean, does DCPS sort of say, here's a school that has a lot of mid-year entrants, therefore it's going to have the following needs, therefore we're going to give it extra money?
I don't think we can tell. The only thing that, and maybe Mary has seen it too, when we compare the FY20 projected enrollment to the FY21 projected enrollment, a number of the high schools are showing much bigger jumps.
So that could be that.
It could be that they're looking at that, but I don't know that that's the case, but it could appear.
All right, well, I'm going to ask one other quick question also to you, and then we'll keep going around, which is about the competition between the after-school and the academic programs, which I have not heard elsewhere. Can you say just a little bit on that?
What we are seeing is there's about $5.2 million for aftercare teachers, aftercare aides, and aftercare administrative positions. And there's about, I think it was $2 million that was coming from the 21st Century Community Center funds from OSSI for that program. There's another $750,000 that's co-payment, which comes from parents. The balance of that, about $1.5 million, is coming from the local school budget. They're having to fund that themselves out of their local school budgets. And what I was seeing as I was looking at it is that was where you often saw there were only 3 related arts teachers, not 4. And it looked to me like they were the schools. And of course, they're the low-income schools because that's why they're getting the program funded. And so they were not, it was clear they were having to make these choices in order to be able to fund their aftercare, which of course is critical. And so, we would absolutely agree with the recommendation on the out-of-school time, but particularly for DCPS, that they are funded so that those schools are not taking those dollars from their academic program to pay for aftercare.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter?
So one thing that I think is interesting, I agree with everything that's been said about the need to fund our budgets at the adequacy study levels at a minimum, or whatever the DME's newest study comes, but then we need to be adequately funding the base funding for all of our schools. One thing I'm eager to hear, though, is, OSSI has a requirement under ESSA that this spring they say they're going to put out the per pupil funding for every school, basically how it breaks down on what was actually spent per kid based on incoming funds of all kinds. I'm really hoping that is an interesting new piece of transparent information that gives us insights into what we can't see right now from DCPS, which is we see the local school budgets and we see, we hear these kinds of stories about what's happening at the school level, but we can't disentangle how many kids the school has, what levels those kids should be funding at under the UPSFF, and what they're actually getting from DCPS versus what money is going somewhere else. And my hope is that this OSSI calculation will show us something different. Am I totally off base? Am I too optimistic about that?
Yes.
Say more.
I've seen OSSI's plans. They're going to give everybody a single number. They're going to take the total expenditures and divide it by the number of kids. So it'll look like schools that have many at-risk students and many special education students, many ELL students. It's going to look like they're floating in money. And the schools that have very few of those students, oh, they're going to look deprived. If they want to do that job, what they need to do is to filter out the funds for different purposes so that we know how much is spent on general education per pupil at each school. And I shouldn't say is, I should say was, because this is actual expenditures. And how much is spent on special education per special education pupil, that kind of thing. That single number is worthless.
Yeah,
I mean, I
bad.
could put that together right now for last year.
I think there is a way you could think about it that's not perfect, but you could think about weighting some composite student by the number of students who are at risk in special education and EL students, and you could get an idea, but I don't think that the average person is going to be able to look at these numbers and tell that.
So let me follow up, because this is my question, is that let's say we're talking about, I'm going to find an example, Thurgood Marshall Academy. It's a single site charter LEA. So I can look at their budget and I can actually say, okay, they get the UPSFF funding, this is what their budget is, so this much other stuff comes from elsewhere, right? I can't do that with any DC public school, and it's harder with multi-site charters. But that came up at the WIXPO meeting last night, that people were saying, yeah, but I'm looking at this and our at-risk funding is going up, but these things are, and Dr. Maestero was very clear, where she's like, you can't do that with DCPS school budgets, because our budgets are based on a comprehensive staffing model. You can't use a per pupil allocation to expect it to match up to what's happening here. And I think that's a thing that the public seeks to know. How much should the school actually be getting based on the kids it's serving versus what it's getting?
Well, the UPSFF, people get a little confused. It is basically the city government's way to allocate to LEAs.
It's the state funding formula.
It's the state funding formula. And it is not how the LEAs, whether or not it's DCPS or the charters. KIP doesn't allocate exactly according to the UPSFF. It has a strategic approach to it. DCPS also has a strategic approach. So it's not supposed to slavishly follow the UPSFF. And this is partly why actually we think from C4DC's perspective that the city needs to be thinking about, okay, that is primary state funding formula, but that is not its only responsibility in terms of funding public education. So.
Mr. Sullivan, additional questions? Ms. Williams? President Wattenberg?
I'm conscious of the time. Let me just throw this out for anybody who wants to. I'm curious how we have this big issue that keeps coming up about the funding of our smaller schools, and so how do other jurisdictions do this in ways that end up seeming fairer? So that's one question. Another is, with regard to DCPS, does anybody have anything to say about, there's been a lot of problems in the past about, I've been one of them. I think people at this table have been very wary of the mandates that are given to the schools. They don't make sense given the budget. So this year there's more discretion, but then things disappear and they're no longer mandates. So people are understandably upset. So I guess it's a question about, is the problem discretion versus mandates? Is the problem that there's not enough money to fund what should be required and have discretion? Okay, I made that too complicated. Focus on the first one.
Okay, other jurisdictions on the whole are very unfair. We have dozens of lawsuits all over the country on state funding because it is unfair, and I've watched the progression of those lawsuits, and what happens is they will initially result in greater equity, and then they slide back. School districts with more minority and more low-income students always get less. It's just the way it works. So I wouldn't look to them as any kind of model, and then goodness knows there are a lot of problems and complaints among civil rights and education finance advocates about unfairness in the distribution within school districts. Upper middle class people win, and that's the way it is.
But Ruth, on the small school issue, I mean, this is something that is an issue everywhere, and smaller schools cost more to operate. And rural communities all over the United States are paying more in their rural communities to educate kids, but they do it because it's the right thing to do. Now, one of the other things that happens in rural communities and states is they consolidate school districts. They don't necessarily make 69 school districts for a community of 10 square miles. And so, but again, to me, this is where we haven't had the conversation in the city about what is the right sort of governance mix for what we have. What should we be doing? Are we actually getting the dollars to the kids? Or are we spending too much on all of these little LEAs, which of course has been an issue nationally in the rural communities where they have school districts of 300, school districts of 160, and these are problems, but they might be 100 miles from the next district, so they don't have a whole lot of choice in many of our remote areas. But in Washington, D.C., it would be a reasonable thing for us to at least discuss and to look at now. I mean, we're 20 years into this experiment. We should be having a conversation about it and how we can advantage our kids in the city with the systems that we have.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Just so DC has a law, right, that says that at least in DCPS, no school should lose more than 5% of their budget year to year. Unfortunately, that is not being followed. Last budget season, 19 schools were experiencing budget cuts of more than 5%. 15 of those schools in Ward 7 and 8. I know other states, they do have like hold harmless sort of policies where, like, again, a school with enrollment declines doesn't lose, drastic amounts of funding, particularly when funding is driven by enrollment numbers. So I do think we have a tool. Policymakers just need to be using it.
All right. Thank you all very much. Before closing, I just want to say to Ms. Filardo, I'm very intrigued by your idea about how we can help be part of shaping some broader plans. So let's definitely talk and get you to talk to other people here about how that could look. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you so much for sticking with us through the evening. Let me just ask, are there any other announcements or comments that anybody wants to make before we adjourn? Okay. Okay, well, with no other business before the State Board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
What? Oh, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The board is now adjourned. I can't even talk at this time of night.
Thank you.